Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good morning. How's everybody doing? My name is Derek Melinda. Welcome to the Night's Last Call. I'm back. I'm back from PAX. And I'm here. I'm streaming. Because I am on the West Coast time zone right now. We were there for a week, and it is only 9:30 inside of my soul. So why not? We'll stream. You know what's going on. What's up, Agile Monk? Good to see you, my friend. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to hear from you. Okay. Apparently, EGADS. Okay. Well, you made it all capital letters, and that confused me. Sinbad says MMOVTTRPG is a crazy acronym. We actually came up with that. Acronym a while ago when we were talking about Northern Reaches, which of course is our Pathfinder 2 MMOVTTRPG. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people mistakenly, and to be clear, we have even done this ourselves. And then when I say we, I really mean Bob. Because Smith and I were very clear that we didn't want to use it. A lot of people refer to this type of game as a Western Reaches type game. And I don't really think that's correct, because a Western Reaches type game realistically is a sort of callback to the way that Gary Gygax ran games, which is that you had a GM. Maybe you had like a secondary GM or something, but you were really just running one game at a time for one group of players, or for multiple groups of players moving through the same campaign setting. That's really what a Western Reaches is. So, Western Marches. It's get confusing now because KOLC called her game Western Reaches, and we always called our game Northern Reaches. So now they have Northern Reaches, Western Marches. So now we should really confuse it and call it Northern Marches. Anyways. So anyways, yeah, we call it an MMO VTT RPG because that's kind of what it is. It's a massively multiplayer virtual tabletop role-playing game. Mecha Maya says Dagger Reaches hype. Yeah, so of course our first mega game that we originally created many years ago was called Northern Reaches, and it was set in It was using the Pathfinder 2 engine, and I always like to say it uses the Pathfinder 2 engine because it isn't Pathfinder 2. We have community games. We have GMs like Boothby who run Pathfinder 2, and they may have some small house rules or changes, but fundamentally it is Pathfinder 2. And the reason why I say that is because I view the game system as being subordinate to the mega game itself, and we use it to sort of power the mega game. But Northern Reaches has been around since 2020. Let me do the math on this. 22, 23, 24. 2022 is when we did our first Northern Reaches season. So naturally, when Daggerheart came out, people started, I don't even know if I started it. I think somebody else started it. But people started saying, Dagger Reaches when? And by that, they meant, are we going to do a mega game for Daggerheart? And, I kind of have talked about it a little bit on the side, somewhat jokingly. And there are some realistic problems that go along with it, for sure. And we can talk about some of those tonight. Because, again, this isn't like an official stream. I am back from traveling. It is, late for me, but it's early for me because I'm still kind of adjusting. I just flew in last night. My plane got in a little after midnight, and I barely made my plane, by the way. So there is really no direct flight from Cleveland to Seattle. So to fly to PAX, I flew to Portland, actually, because Steven and I picked up a U-Haul truck at his distributor in Portland, which is where his warehouse is, his West Coast warehouse. So I met the fine folks at Crown. We loaded up the thing. We drove up the I-5 or whatever to Seattle. Then we flew home from Seattle. Well, both my flight there and back had one stop. On the way to Portland, my stop was in Denver. Lovely, lovely airport. On my ride home, my layover was in MDW, Chicago, which is a horrific airport. And already, it was Southwest. So leaving Seattle, the flight was already delayed. It was a full flight, and it was already delayed. And I was in boarding group C. So I'm in the back of the plane, basically. And flight's delayed. I'm like, okay, great. Well, that's okay. I've got 90 minutes or something like that, 100 minutes to make my flight. It's fine. So we get on the plane. We're like 30 minutes into the plane, and there's some sort of medical emergency in the front of the plane. Apparently, some person had gotten on the plane with their oxygen tank, had forgotten to fill their oxygen tank, and so was having problems breathing. So they had to kind of like trigger the mask drop so that this person could have their oxygen an oxygen mask to help supplement their breathing. Okay. But they did announce that when we arrived in Chicago, that now keep in mind, Chicago to Cleveland is like a 45-minute flight. It's like literally you're going up to your cruising altitude, and they're like, they do one pass for like water, and then they're like, the flight attendants will be coming around to collect any of your waste as we begin our ascent in Cleveland. It's like you are up and down. It's like a 45-minute flight. So I'm in Chicago. So we're going to Chicago, and they say, you're going to have to, we hope everyone understands, blah, blah, blah. When we get to Chicago, the EMTs have to come onto the plane first, make sure that we can, deal with this person, get them off, and, make sure they're okay. Okay, fine. So then we're landing. We're fine. We're delayed, but we're going to be delayed again because we can't get off the plane until the EMTs get there. But we're landing. We're going to land. I can feel, I can hear the wheels come out, and then all of a sudden we're banking hard to the left. And I'm like, well, that's not normal. So then he comes on the plane. Hey, folks, we have to do a go around. There was a plane on the runway that wasn't supposed to be there. Don't worry, we'll have you on the ground here in a few minutes. So we loop around. Wasting more precious time. And then we land finally, and we're coming into the jetway, and we're waiting. We're like, where are these EMTs? I'm like, thank God it wasn't like a critical medical emergency. The person would be dead. And then the captain comes on. Sorry, folks. I hate to tell you this, but the jetway bridge is down, is broken. We're waiting to get a tow into the jetway bridge. Okay. So finally, the jetway bridge comes on, they tow us to the jetway bridge. They get us connected. The EMTs come on. They help the person off. Everyone, politely claps. And we're all ready to go on. And then they come on with one last announcement. Thank you so much for your patience. Just remember, we have some folks here who are trying to make connections. So if this is your final destination, or if you've got a lot of time here at Chicago before you have to get onto your next plane, if you would so much, we'd really appreciate it if you all just stayed in your seats and let those who have a very short flight, a very near-term connection, to get. You know that every single person on that motherfucking plane stood up. Of course they did. Everyone stood up. Now, is there a chance that every single person there was on a, I don't know, let's say sub 20-minute plane to catch? No, of course not. But everybody stood up, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and then then starts this other problem, which I have with flying, and this isn't anybody's fault. This is the airline's fault. The airline's fault is that when they started charging for checked bags, and not just charging, but charging a lot of money, and then airlines like Southwest still give you a carry-on for free, and that means that now everybody brings a carry-on. Even though there are some people who probably should not have a carry-on. And by that I mean maybe short people, old people, people who maybe can't physically, lift a 30 or 40-pound carry-on over their head and into the overhead compartment. Again, should those people be able to fly? Absolutely. Should their baggage be checked? Of course it should be. There's no reason why this person should have to be, about to crush their face because they're trying to, some 5'0", 70-year-old woman should not be trying to take a bag out of the overhead compartment. It's going to crush her. So it took forever, obviously. And I felt bad because the people next to me were actually in a different gate. I lucked out. My gate, while at the other end of the terminal, was still in the A gate. So I ran. It's been a long time since I had to run in an airport, but I ran, and I made it onto my plane with like 3 minutes to spare. So thank goodness for that. So finally, arrived in Cleveland late. But so that was my yesterday. So then today, I slept until like 1 or 2 o'clock. So yeah, I've only been up for like 10 hours. It's a long way of saying, yes, I'm tired after traveling, especially after, we did Gen Con not that long ago, and then this, and now, but, we're here. So that was my story. That was my backstory.
Edward tipped $15. I didn't win the 1.4 billion in Powerball, so here's some money. #Dagger Hype. #Dagger Reaches.
Edward, thank you so much. Yeah, Dagger Hype is indeed real. I didn't win it either. I didn't play, but I didn't win it either. But I appreciate you, Edward. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have 2 tip goals. One is support for Dagger Reaches, and the other one is buy me a Vegas dinner, because I'm leaving in 6 days, 5 days, to go to Vegas. Yeah, now it's 5 days. I'm going to Vegas. It was a plan. It was a trip. We always go in the fall around my birthday, and we had booked this. We had planned this trip before I even lost my job. So, it's already paid for and all this other jazz. So, I'm going to go anyways. But, going to Vegas when you're not working, is not always great. Roll for Combat bought me many dinners. Let me just tell you something. Roll for Combat and I, we had some nice meals. We went to Din Tai Fung. We went to the hotel restaurant, which was really nice. We went there on the last night because we were really exhausted and we were really tired. I thought it was great sushi. He thought it was terrible sushi.
Edward tipped $10. My mom made me play. Here's some support for Diane Nimble too.
Oh, thank you again, Edward. That's so nice of you. My mom made me play. Well, we did get the Nimble sent to us, and Evan's going to be sending us a physical copy. So definitely look forward to that. Thank you, Edward. I really appreciate that. Die is going to be on the short list, but we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. Many dinners were eaten just to get this information. This is true, Zen Bullet. Yes, Cyclone. If you check your bag, they do follow you. I mean, they're supposed to, right? Of course, everybody hears, horror stories of, like Derek Rawlings here saying, I never check my baggage. I can't trust an airline not to screw that up too. And you know what? To be clear, the first time I ever flew internationally, I was a senior in high school. I had been in the Spanish language program for, all high school. So I was in AP Spanish. And there was a big trip for a trip to Spain and France, and Joshua, buddy, wow, holy shit balls, holy frickin' shirt balls.
I am strong.
We got a strong super chat here. Here is the Fabula Ultima money in advance. Thank you for your Vegas dinner. Well, thank you in advance for your Vegas dinner. Well, thank you, Joshua Chapman. I really, really, really appreciate that. I'll take the advance, buddy. Thank you so much. That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to. Looking forward to do that. That's going to be awesome. Thank you, Joshua. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That is fantastic. Yeah. Again. When I get back, we will certainly dial that in. But thank you so much, Joshua. I appreciate you. Oh yeah, well that's a Bavette's dinner right there. That's a nice steakhouse right there. I'll be getting the extra. I'll be getting the Bernaise sauce with that one. Joshua, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. Yeah, Fabula Ultima is such a cool game. There's so much there that I think other games should beg, borrow, and steal. I'm really looking forward to this Kickstarter coming up, for sure. Here's the thing. I've gotten really nice steaks before, and to be honest with you, I don't really need, like, I've gotten Wagyu before. I've gotten, the dry aged, in whatever porterhouse, and it's fine. But I honestly just like a nice, solid, quality piece of prime beef. And, and most nice steak cooked very well, which most of these steakhouses do very well. They have nice cuts of meat. They cook them very proficiently, very well. And I find that I can get a really good cut of meat from anywhere from, $60 to $80, So, well, the problem, Copperblint, the problem, Copperblint, is the way that most of these Vegas steakhouses are cooking their steaks, especially something like a thicker cut. They're cooking it sous vide. All right, and I don't have sous vide. So they're cooking it sous vide. And for those of you who don't know, right, sous vide is where you take the cut of meat, you put it in a vacuum seal pouch, you stick it in the water. If you want it medium rare, they're going to cook it exactly to medium rare. So the entire steak is whatever it is, 135 or whatever, through all of that. Then they pull it out. Maybe they pull it out a few degrees short, and then they stick it into a salamander. And a salamander is like a hyper broiler. That, again, I definitely don't have a hyper broiler. We're talking like 800, 900 degrees Fahrenheit, just intense heat. So you get an incredible Maillard reaction. You just get insane crust, insane browning, while leaving, 90% of the steak, let's say medium. And, you're obviously going to get that nice char and that nice thing. So that's a really nice way to cook a steak. It's just very involved, and I don't have the time or the inclination to do that. So, yeah. Apparently, you guys are on another level. So Copper and Mindblown both have a sous vide. So Peanuts, he says, I'm Aussie. Cook on one side for 3 or 4, then flip. You know what? That's how I did it. That's how I've always done it. But the truth of the matter is, and this is actually true. I didn't mean to get off on this tangent, but since it was Feed Me in Vegas, and and since Joshua came in and with the $200 super chat, we'll talk about it a little bit. I really do. This is crazy. Now, of course, remember, I used to have a really nice job. And we were very flexible job. And then by very flexible, I mean I worked from home and we had unlimited PTO. Now, not to be abused, but for the most part, if you had your work done and you asked in advance, they pretty much always approved you. And I really didn't take the entire time I was at that company, I never took a 2-week vacation. Most of my vacations were like 5 days, which is usually a convention, right? Gen Con, Origins, right? That's a 5-day, and that includes a weekend. So like Gen Con might be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'm not really even taking, and then I'd be back Monday, maybe Tuesday. So most of the time I was taking 3 days and then a weekend. Or we'd go to Vegas. And again, Vegas for us is usually 4 to 5 days. Honestly, there's no point staying in Vegas longer than that. So any case, very flexible job, made the good money. And so we would go to Vegas, 3 times a year. Sometimes, there were a couple of years where I think we went 4 times. So I can honestly say I do not eat steak except when I am in Vegas. I do not eat out around here, around my own house, like almost ever. Unless you count like occasionally going to Raising Cane's. But in terms of like going to like a nice restaurant, I never do that around here. And, I'm single. I don't have anybody to impress. I'm not dating anybody. So I really only eat like true red meat, like outside of like a burger, like in Vegas. So I really only eat steak when I'm in Vegas. So I don't cook it at home. I don't cook steaks at home, and I don't really go out to eat here. So the only time I really eat red meat, is when I'm in Vegas. So, and it's not even like a moral thing. It's just I don't really care to cook it and own it and buy it and all this other stuff. And there was a time. There was a time and a place, Case Time. Let me tell you all. I mean, you all remember what this time was like. And this time for me came at the best possible time you could imagine. It came when I was in college. It came when I was just out of college. All right. We're talking ages like 18, I don't know, whatever it was, 18 to 25, 18 to 26. This was the time. This was the era of 3 things. 1, $5 footlong. Okay, I would have starved to death if it wasn't for the $5 footlong. I'm talking Subway. Okay, number 2, 5 for $5 at Arby's. That's right, and I'm not talking about the micro roast beef sandwiches they give you today. I'm talking about the full size roast beef sandwich, 5 for $5. And in my area, in my neck of the woods, Arby's was almost always right next to a Taco Bell, and this is when Taco Bell had the grande meal. And the grande meal was $10. And for $10, you got 10 tacos, hard or soft, a Mexican pizza, and an order of nachos Bel Grande. That's nachos with all the fixins, right? Refried beans, beef, some jalapenos, cheese. So it was very well known for us to go to Arby's and then hit up the Taco Bell, right? So we're talking $15. And you'd get 5 Arby's sandwiches, 10 tacos, a whole order of nachos Bel Grande, and a whole Mexican pizza for $15. Incredible. And when I was on campus, if you had your college ID, you got like $1 off at the Subway. So like for $4, you could get the footlong, And let me tell you something. I don't know how many Italian or BMT subs I ate between 2000 to 2004, 2005, but it was a lot. It was an incredible amount of Subway. Oh man, it's crazy. Yeah. Now forget about it. Just forget about everything. Anyways, so yeah, I will certainly enjoy the advance. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Okay, sorry. I missed some chats earlier here. So Roll for Combat said, "What are you doing? You're still on West Coast time?" Yeah. Well, like I said, I slept until 2 because I mean, basically, maybe like 1 o'clock or something like that. But yeah. So definitely on the West Coast time. Yeah, I know. I was saying it wrong. Are Northern Reaches and Western Reaches in the same universe? Well, you'd have to ask KOLC, but my guess is no. Copper's looking forward to the spate. Seldone Hari. What's up, Hari? The game matters for the mega game in some regard. I think PF2 is well suited to a mega game type of play because of some features of the game. The game system actually 100% does matter, and we'll definitely talk about that as we get into that. For sure. Edward FP. So excited. Fabulous Ultima Session 0 on Saturday night. KOLC maybe jump on the chance to play. Well, that's fantastic, Edward. I think Fabulous Ultima is really great, and I'm honestly really looking forward to the bestiary. And Ema was showing me some stuff at Gen Con. It's going to be really good. It's going to be really good. I mean, I don't know if some of that stuff's been shown publicly now yet, but at the time, I don't think it was. But, again, that was a couple weeks ago. It was really, really good. Maine lobster is very good. I like all shellfish except scallops. And, Stephen Glicker and I, obviously we have a lot of in common. But it's crazy. The more time we spend together, the more time we realize just how much we have in common. We were, it was the first night, we were just quickly looking for a place. We went over to like Target or something like that to see if we could buy like a box cutter or something. I don't remember why we went over there. But we were kind of hungry and we were like thinking about places to go. And then Steve goes, "Oh, look, there's a Luke's Lobster." And I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's like a chain, but they sell, they have pretty good seafood." And I said, "They have this like seafood flight." And I said, "Cool, let's go." So we go in there, and they have a seafood flight. It's basically like a lobster roll. It's like a little mini lobster roll, but you get a little mini lobster roll, a crab roll, and a shrimp roll. So it's like 3 things. And I said, "Oh, that's great. Those are all 3 of my favorite shellfish." I go, and he goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "I love also shellfish, except for scallops." And he goes, I hate scallops too." And I said, "That's crazy." But yeah, so we liked all the shellfish except for the scallops. And I'll eat oysters, but not raw. I don't want to eat anything like that raw. I prefer clams, and I like mussels too, but especially if they have butter. But yeah, it was really good. We had some really nice dinner. We went to this place called Rumba, which was recommended to us by Jess Redicop, from the channel from PF2 and other sources. That was pretty good. So yeah, I love it. Next donation, go get Derek a sous vide. No. Unfortunately, Jake, I am going to be on my super uber food prep era where for the next 3 months until the end of the year, I'm going to be really eating boring meals, and they're kind of going to be on repeat, where they're going to be in Tupperware containers and little bento boxes just to manage my eating. I really want to. I've been in my at my 240s for a couple months now, since convention season had ended. It's every couple weeks. It seems like I'm going to another convention. So I have a big stretch here after Vegas before PAX Unplugged, and I really want to lock in and try to lose another 20 pounds. Anyways. Did we just become best friends? Yeah. 20, that's a good amount. I mean, for me at 6'1", 6'1", 6'2", whatever, depending on how hydrated I am. If I lose 20, 25 pounds, like that's a good solid drop, in pant sizes. That's like going from like a 38 to like a 36, or like maybe going down from like, well, I'm like, it probably wouldn't be to a large shirt, but like from an extra large is probably a little too tight to an extra large is nice, like maybe it's a little loose, unfortunately there's not a lot of wiggle room there, but yeah. I just got to build up that chest, fill up the top. Anyways. All right. So, well, we've certainly had a fun time here, and we wasted some time here. You've already gone to a smaller belt notch and started my job. Well, there you go. That'll get you motivated. That'll get you moving. I try to stay active, obviously, especially. I'm actually moving more now. That's one of the advantages since losing my job. Now that I'm not stuck at my desk all day, I can get out more. I'm going to parks. I'm walking more, taking the dogs for more walks, and all that other stuff. So it's pretty good. So, Dagger Reaches, supposedly. What is a mega game? What does it do? What does it mean? So Dagger Reaches, fundamentally, there's a couple of things that I always want to think about, like, what is it that I want to achieve for this? So the first thing that I want to achieve is, quite frankly, is to give, people a chance to play. Now, this is a unique situation when we talk about Daggerheart, because Daggerheart, when we did PF2 had been out for 3 years. We already had an established base of people who were playing PF2, who had been playing PF2. Now, Smith, when he created, the framework for Northern Reaches, he said one of the things that he wanted to do was to make it a place where people could feel comfortable, to learn how to GM. But it has this extra component here of teaching people, period. Right? So, like, we're going to have, I think, like, let's just imagine a theoretical world where we had this ready to go and it launched. I do know that there'd be a number of existing Knights of the Last Call patrons who would play this game, but we would also presumably add a number of people. Now, historically, our PF2 games have ranged anywhere from, at their, they kind of usually start around 50 to 60 people. And sometimes we do have instances where they kind of where things pick up, and that will increase to like as much as 100 active players. And then, as the season kind of wears down, sometimes it usually ends up dropping down to, let's say, 40 to 60. And of course, obviously, some people are more active, right, than others. And so, what is an active player? Well, we have some people who play, multiple times per week, and we have other people who maybe play a couple times a month. But when it comes to, so I imagine there are going to be a lot of people who sign up. But when it comes to Daggerheart, we have, between these two issues, we have kind of an interesting kind of dilemma here, which is that we are going to be potentially be the first opportunity that people really have in order to play Daggerheart. And the reason why that is not, I don't want to say problematic, but the reason that adds an extra level of complexity is because normally we kind of presume that people are coming in with sort of an already existing framework. They already know how to play this game. And I think that a lot of people are going to be playing this, and they're going to be going like, oh, okay, well, I don't know how to play this game, and no one's ever played this game. So how do we, how do we play? And we have to kind of make some extra levels, an extra level of consideration. And when it comes to that, so that I think is, I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's something that we have to be extra careful about, which is that, there's going to be a lot of people who are joining and not know how to play. Maybe they've been excited to play Daggerheart, but they don't have a group for it, and they don't have people around them maybe that are interested. Maybe everyone's playing PF2 or they're playing 5e. And so this is, and of course, Daggerheart is cool and we're excited, but let's call it what it is. Even compared to PF2, it is a much smaller footprint. You're much more likely, much more able to, say, go to a convention or go to your local game shop and find a PF2 game than you're going to be able to find a Daggerheart game, especially after Critical Role chose not to play it. So you're going to have a lot of people coming in. Now, why is that an extra level of problem? Now, again, this is a late night workshop, Justin. This is the type of thing that I normally do when I sit down with my journal and I kind of just think through things. I'm just talking it out with you all. I'm happy to have this conversation with you all. And, hear your thoughts. You all are very smart people, and I'm happy to get your advice. I mean, that's kind of what we do here. We're a community, we're a community of educators and entertainers, but we're also here to learn. Traditionally, a game like Northern Reaches has, anywhere from 10 to 20 pages of custom rules that go on atop of the game of PF2. Not to mention that as the game proceeds forward, as I said before, the mega game is what the game is playing. You're not playing Pathfinder 2. You're playing Northern Reaches, and it is powered by PF2. You are not playing Daggerheart. You're playing Dagger Reaches, powered by Daggerheart. And the problem there is, historically, what makes our mega community games great is that they are a living, breathing world. And as a result of that, the people who play in it tend to change the game. And that means when people come in, maybe they want to, and again, what does this even mean? They want to learn Daggerheart raw, right? They want to play Daggerheart raw, whatever that is. And that doesn't really exist. And we still, to this day, get sometimes some frustration and we get some friction with people who join Northern Reaches because they think it's going to be like Pathfinder Society. And they think they're going to be able to just, like when they play Pathfinder Society and everything is just codified by the book straight up. And it's not like that, because the whole point of Northern Reaches is that you are playing in a communal campaign. And that means that the actions of other people will affect you. And that may include things that change the nature of the rules. In fact, the rules that we use may be very different from the rules that you might expect or would otherwise find in a Pathfinder 2 game. So when this creates a tension, because people are going to be coming here to, quote, learn how to play, and one of the goals that I have for this channel is to educate people, and then they want a chance to play. But one of the sort of defining characteristics of our mega games is that the game itself is different. And it has different components and it has different elements into it that makes it more than just, it's more than the sum of its parts. It's not just an excuse to play a bunch of Daggerheart or a bunch of PF2. And one of the things that I have, frequently seen a lot of people do with their so-called mega games is they will create basically like a hub, and all the players are in the hub, and then basically the GM just has their own world over here, and the GM has their own world over here, and basically each GM's world is like its own little campaign, okay? And the players can come from the hub and go play in the GM's campaign, and then they come back to the hub. But the GM's adventure is contained within this adventure. Maybe it's a portal to another realm. And I've seen some people suggest that's, well-meaning, and they don't realize that we've discussed this for many, many years. This is exactly and precisely what I don't want. Because in that way, it actually is a little bit more like a traditional MMO, where you have things like instancing and, phasing, and kind of what you're doing doesn't really affect what other people are doing, right? I don't want that. Okay? I want it to function more like a campaign. And you are all players in that same campaign world. Now, I do want to give GMs freedom to create games and to run them. But ultimately, what I'm looking for is for games that the GMs are running that are going to influence and be influenced by the other GMs' games. I want the GMs to collaborate. I want the GMs to work together to create massive story arcs that feel like they have, global spanning potential. And I think that creates a more vibrant, living world experience. As an example of this, one of the truisms that's always been true of our Northern Reaches games is like if there's some big bad evil guy dragon boss monster, okay, if the players go if some group of players goes and kills it, it's dead for everyone. Okay? There's no like, oh, cool, sick, we're going to go raid him next week and I hope he drops his armor, or I hope he drops that sweet broken mace. No. It was a unique dragon. It got killed by a group of players, and now that dragon is dead. It's not like you can just sit there and go, let's run that dungeon again, Nor is it like, hey, every player get in line, the classic MMO thing, right? Where you walk up and you just completed the quest and you turn it into the NPC who's in prison and then he's released and from the orcs and he's like, thank you, da. And then he kind of fades away and then reappears in the cell, like while you're standing there, waiting to be released again. And of course, nowadays in modern MMOs, they realize that's lame. So they use like the phasing and the instancing. But fundamentally, you understand that person is not really released. So we try to avoid that. We try to create this expansive world where the actions that you take and the successes and the failures that you experience during a session reverberate throughout the entire campaign. And so as a result of this, quite frankly, things can and will change. So let me give you an example. This is not exactly this could literally happen, right? We're playing the game of Daggerheart, Dagger Reaches, okay? And there's some ancient, I don't know, pick a random evil. There's some sort of, ancient, there's some sort of ancient ziggurat, and a group of players investigates it, and it awakens some ancient evil, and some other ancient ziggurats begin arising out of the ground across the realm, okay? And no one's really quite sure what is going on. They just know that there's these sort of black, obsidian ziggurats, which are sort of thrusting out of the ground. And, no one's really quite sure what's going on, but, there's been a report that there's as many as half a dozen scattered across the realms. Now, the players might not know what's going on, but maybe the GM secretly in the back, right? But as these ziggurats emerge, a pall of darkness begins to cover the lands. And the GM, the overlords, the GM council, right, announce a new event, or they announce a new condition or a new event that's occurring in the realm, and it's called the Veil of Fear. And then maybe there's some really cool italicized flavor text here about, blah, blah, blah. And it says, right, GMs start each session with ×2 fear. Okay? And, that obviously, it's still up to the GM's discretion. And let me tell you something. Well, this is like a tangent to this tangent. One of the things that I'm really excited about with potentially a Dagger Reaches is one of the things that we've struggled with, and this actually has been a struggle that we've had this past season, this current season, I should say, of Northern Reaches Season 3, is normally we're fairly heavy-handed with these events. Like, if you're playing Pathfinder 2, and I'm making an assumption here that you know how Pathfinder 2 works, but we could also make it for 5e, whatever. we might have an event, similar event, Veil of Fear, right? And we might say that players start with the frightened 2 condition, and they can't lose it, right? Now that has a serious mechanical consequence, and that can make some big changes to the way that you run your game, and potentially give the GM or the GM's like, wow, I designed this fight, and now because of this event, everything's fucked up because of this event. It kind of messes what I was trying to do. What I'm excited about is the use of fear as a meta currency, but also the use of fear moves or GM moves as a way to give options to the GM without making it so static and so forced. Okay? And instead of giving the GM this sort of ultimatum or this sort of requirement, what we can do instead, now technically, right? I mean, fear moves in Daggerheart can be whatever you want them to be. In fact, the game would even encourage, like, if the GM thinks something's appropriate, do it. And if you think it's kind of really evil and nasty, say, oh, that cost me a fear. Maybe that cost me 2 fear, right? So you don't actually need fear moves. But when you're part of a mega game, okay, so let's do another example, okay? So let's say there's another event, which is called, like the Rise of the Necro Legions, okay? And we give all the GMs a new fear move, and it costs 3 fear, and it basically says, ambush the party with some undead. That's it. Now, a GM could have done this anyways, technically, but by giving each GM this quote-unquote fear move, it does a couple of things. Number one, it legitimizes it. Number two, when it does happen, the players and the GM will feel it like it's tying in to this wider event that's occurring, right? The Veil of Fear is rising. The Ziggurats are unleashing. The Necro Legions have been unleashed upon the realm. But if you as the GM are really not feeling it, or you as the GM you guys are really caught up in doing some sort of heavy role playing, or maybe there's a really intense social encounter, or your adventure is taking place, in the city sewers, and it maybe doesn't even make sense that, you'd be fighting the Necro Legions or something like that, then you don't have to include this. It's your choice. And because it's your choice, it puts sort of the power into the GM's hands in order to sort of, create this sort of element. But the other thing is it becomes this kind of fun. It's like the GM gets to level up. The GM is getting these new moves, right? Like, and that kind of feels cool, right? Because you're like, yeah, like, I get, technically you could do this anyways, but you get this idea, this sense of like, again, like leveling up, and like as these bad things happen, you have this now cool list of sort of overlord approved, council approved ideas that you can then incorporate into your game. And that could also then generate, other effects, which we can talk about later. Exactly, LaFleur. GMs are playing too. They should have things to look forward to as well. And so I think having that list of sort of GM fear moves is a really cool way that we can sort of manage this. And then, of course, obviously, if the GMs don't have fear, have a lot of fear, it can change the way that the game plays. If the GM is attacking the party with a ton of Necro Legions, then they're not going to have their fear to do other things. And so, that's going to change the sort of the feel of the adventure as well. And I like that. So I like this. This is one of the things that I'm most excited about when it comes to, giving options to the GM. And again, I think that's really, really, really cool. When we're kind of going off on a tangent to the tangent, but this might change or be dependent upon maybe the place that you're at or where you're going to, right? Anyways, so yeah, we live for Derek's tangents. Fear moves are great, and they're going to provide a lot of things, because the other things too is like what you learn. I didn't really. I mean, I've played games with meta currency, like GM meta currency, right? Like 2D20 has the Doom pool. I don't remember what it's called actually. Threat, and not really Fate, but and obviously for me, the really experience was like from Fabula Ultima was Ultima points, and it's very similar to Malice, obviously in the same way, but there's a thing that when the GM has this pool of fear and they're spending it to create these effects, it just feels, I think, very different, especially in, and this is another consideration that we have to make, a mega game. Because you're not playing with your GM, right? You're playing with a GM. And as a result, obviously Daggerheart has, probably the biggest concern is that Daggerheart is a fiction-forward game. Now, that has some advantages and some disadvantages. One of the advantages is that the rules and the balance aren't as critical as they might be in another game like PF2, which is good because it means if something happens to your character, it doesn't necessarily mean that your character is unplayable. The truth of the matter is, when it comes to PF2, if one random GM decided to put some horrible curse on your character might literally become unplayable in the context of Pathfinder 2. Look, Pathfinder 2 makes certain core assumptions. You need to have certain levels of stats to really be able to function in that game. And while that is somewhat true, you get a lot more leeway in a game like Daggerheart. So, to that end, but where we run into a problem is that I want this isn't Pathfinder 2, and that means that GMs are encouraged to sort of just, fuck it, we ball, and go where the fiction takes them, and one GM might run the game differently than another GM. Now that might sound crazy, but the truth of the matter is that's already true in Pathfinder 2, and it's already true in Northern Reaches. So, we've been doing this for technically we've been doing this for 5 seasons, right? Northern Reaches, season 1, season 2, season 3, Northman Challenge, and Southern Beaches. So we have 5 seasons of Northern Reaches, 2, non-canon variant seasons, but 5 total. And the fact of the matter is, some GMs love combat. And when you join their games, it's extremes, extreme pluses, extreme plus pluses. They've got a list of house rules in a Google document that you have to go read because they have a unique system of tracking escalating doom or depletion because their dungeon drains you of your life. And they have this whole mega system. And when you play their game, that's their game. Then we have other GMs who are like, it'll probably be mostly role-playing. We might make a handful of skill checks. Don't expect there to be any combat. And if there is, it'll probably be low or more moderate. So you already have 2 very different, levels of it. One of our GM council members, Laughing Outlaw, a huge fan of the channel, a person to whom I owe a great deal, including a table, which sadly probably will never happen because my wood shop burned down before I could build it for him, including the wood that I bought to build the table with it. But shout out Laughing Outlaw. But anyways, Laughing Outlaw is a member of our GM council. And he has a list of house rules that when you play in one of his games of Pathfinder 2, he has a special house rule that says if you were knocked down and you stand up after being revived, you can also use like 2 free interact actions to pick up the shit that you dropped. See, officially in Pathfinder 2, if I'm holding a 2 swords or I'm holding a sword and a shield, when I get knocked unconscious, I fall to the ground and I drop all my items. And that means if some cool cleric comes around and heals me, I'm on the ground, prone, I have my hit points back, but I'm not holding anything. So I have to spend all of my actions to stand up, pick up my item, pick up my other item.
Sunhawk tipped $50.
Hey, Sunhawk.
Nothing clever to say. Just enjoying a salad and the tangents.
Well, shit. Thank you. Well, there we go. Tip goal complete. You guys are fucking awesome. Sunhawk, thank you so much. What kind of salad are you enjoying, Sunhawk? Thank you so much for that. Sunhawk, are you also hyped for Dagger Reaches, or are you just saying you appreciate the tangents? But I do love me a good salad. There's another thing that I discovered with me and Steven Glicker. We're the final night. We go to the hotel restaurant, which ended up being really good. And Steven orders a charcuterie plate, which was really good as an appetizer. And he's kind of like looking, and he goes, "What are you thinking about?" I go, "I'm thinking about getting this Caesar salad." And he goes, I love Caesar salad. I go, I love Caesar salad too. So we split a Caesar salad and the charcuterie board, and then he got fish and chips, and I got a really good burger. It was really good. Thank you, Sunhawk. But anyways, I like salad a lot. So anyways, and then Mechamaya says, and then the cleric who invested a feat into heroic recovery cries. Because this is Pathfinder 2, so of course there's a feat that helps you to do that, but in his game it does nothing because you get to do it for free. Hell yeah. Well, I was gone for a week. People, you guys missed me. Thank you. In fact, I did say the other day when I posted from the last day of PAX, I said, looking forward to getting home and streaming. I miss you guys. I really do mean that. I love talking role-playing games with you guys, and it's really, really fun. Sweet. Sunhawk says, I got a physical copy of the book last week for my birthday. Sick. So very hyped. Then my Friday group has been playing it since the PDF came out. Well, shit, Sunhawk. That's awesome. You're ahead of the curve here. Cal says, lame, you should need to pick up the item so that you can generate a resentment towards PF2 and go play a game that doesn't nickel and dime you. So, yeah. Anyways, point is, I find that in a game where and this is kind of where I was going with this earlier point, in a game where the GM can kind of make shit happen, I find that players feel a lot better about it if there's some kind of meta currency, right, that is being drained as a result of the GM doing their GM bullshit. And if it's very transparent. So if you and I are playing Fabula Ultima, and the villain basically goes, "Rah, rah, 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 rah. You think you've defeated me, but I will get you next time." And then with a very elaborate flourish, he raises his hand, the room begins to collapse, and he swiftly goes behind a one-way secret door, which gets collapsed behind him. And I spend my 2 ultimate points, I think it's 2 ultimate points, to have the GM, or to have the villain get away, which is an established rule that exists totally in the game. It's not hidden behind some GM screen. The players can fucking read it in the book. I think that players go, cool, the GM is just playing the game. But if you did that in 5e, and it might technically be totally legit, in which case, I mean, props on you as a game master for prepping that. But somehow, if you did that in 5e, even if it was quote-unquote legit, I think people would be like, fucking lame. If they did it in PF2 as well. And I know this because, honestly, I would feel the same way. Because, number one, I probably wouldn't believe that my GM had prepped that. And then, number two, if my GM had prepped that, I'd be like, what a dick. Why did you prep that? And then, number three, it would just feel like we got nothing out of that. And so, at the very least, when the GM has to sort of cash in this meta currency in order to kind of make GM bullshit magic happen, at least you can feel like, hey, at least we reduced that. We get that that's part of the game that we signed up to do. Part of the game that we bought into is that the GM can use this bullshit meta currency to make bullshit things happen at bullshit appropriate times. Just spend the currency. Cool. You did what you do, and that's totally fine, and that's totally legit. But see, like in D&D, we don't have that bullshit meta currency. And so I think there's and of course I think that D&D and Pathfinder 2 are very combat, or campaign as competition coded. So people are looking at it as this is a fight, right? I'm here to beat the bad guy. And then when I'm running up the scoreboard, right? The score is 50-3. And then suddenly the GM pulls some bullshit that's like, the game is canceled because of weather. It's a tie. And you're like, come on, that's fucking bullshit, ref. That's bullshit, ump. And you're kind of right, So, yeah. And so I think that having these access to these meta currencies allows players to kind of feel better about sort of some of the bullshit that people might be coming up with. Which is only my point to say that GMs are already doing this in our PF2 campaign. So I don't think people doing it in Daggerheart is going to be really any different. The difference might be that in Daggerheart, people might be like, oh, I actually feel better about it because you're spending some fear to do it, and we understand that that's sort of part and parcel of the game, right? So thank you, Sunhawk, for that so much. I just want to catch up here with we were on a triple tangent inception here. So Edward, I mean, I think there's sort of a give and take. I mean, about like GM fear moves. I mean, personally, like one of the cool things would be that like a group goes out and the GM uses this on them, and they said, well, that's fucking rough. And then that group of players goes back to the Discord and they share what happened to them. And then another group says the same thing happened to us. And then like the players as a community start sort of putting it together that something is happening and that the GMs now have this power to summon Necro Legion squads. And they kind of put the pieces together. That is a really cool experience.
Cal tipped $3. I am having fun with Dragontide. PS sign up, I need players PP, and I am hyped for Dagger Reaches. Will this be with the 12 domain Daggerheart?
So Cal is, of course, Cal is a Patreon. Cal is not just a patron. Cal is also involved in some of our Daggerheart discussions. Cal, number one, so one of the reasons we're talking about Dagger Reaches is because Dragontide launched this week. It actually launched Monday. Dragontide is another mega game that we are currently doing here at Night's Last Call, which is tied to Dragonbane. So it is powered by Dragonbane. And each new game sort of uses DNA from the previous one and sort of evolves. And we want also it to feel different. Dragontide is tied to Dragonbane, which is a level-less game. It's a very mirth and mayhem game. It's a beer and pretzel style game. So it has a lot more random tables. You roll randomly to determine what race or species your character will be. You roll your stats randomly. So it is very much, I don't want to say it's like old school, but it's a little bit more old school, right? So it has that kind of different random vibe to it. When your character is reduced to 0 hit points, you roll on this injury table. They could die. If you roll a 20, you die. So, there's a 5% chance every time you get dropped that you die. Otherwise, you take an injury. If you get dropped while you have an injury, then you roll that D20 roll with a Bane, which means you're rolling 2D20 keep high. Remember, 20s are bad in Dragonbane. So that means now you have something like, whatever is it, like a 9% chance or something, or like whatever, of rolling a 20. So now you have 2 injuries. If you drop again, that would be, now you're rolling with 2 Banes. So now you're rolling 3D20 keep high. So again, I don't want to say it's like more grim and more death focused, but it's got a more old school vibe to it. It's a little bit more about like hex crawling and managing your resources and your encumbrance, that is sort of tied into that style of game. So Dragontide is using Dragonbane, which is a very, very, very simple, very loose system. I mean, the entire Dragonbane book, which includes like monsters and the GM book, is like 100 pages. It does, Finlay. So the random right dice roll for Dragonbane is you roll it randomly. Species like elves, wolfkin, mallards are very rare. Most of the time you're going to roll human or halfling. And we do give you one option. You have to roll for your species randomly. And if you don't like what you rolled, you can be a human. So if you roll an elf, or if you roll a wolfkin, or if you roll a dwarf, or if you roll whatever, and you don't want to be that, you can just choose to be a human. But you don't get to re-roll, and you don't get to pick your race. Or your species. You have to roll it. So that means, in theory, elves and the like will be rare because they do not happen. And again, that's because if you look at Dragonbane, right? I mean, it says right here on the box, right? It says, it says mirth and mayhem role playing. Right? Like the whole idea of this game is not, I don't want to say not take it seriously, but the whole idea of the game is it's kind of like, fuck it, we ball, like, let's go, it's kind of random. And so, that's tying into that element of the game. So, whereas I would probably not actually use random tables for Daggerheart. Specifically because I feel Daggerheart is number one, I think Daggerheart doesn't already have those. Dragonbane was convenient. It already had those. So, I mean, clearly the game is sort of espousing that idea. But also, I think that's a different feel. I think Daggerheart should feel like a different game. It should be a different game. Which I think is really, really cool. So, yeah, I agree, mind blown. Villains really can't escape in D&D and Pathfinder, not realistically, and not in a way that doesn't feel cheap and artificial and manufactured. Salad is spinach, butter lettuce is good. Spinach is good. I do like a nice mixed green. Smoked turkey, okay. Apples, Cosmic Crisp is the only apple I'm eating anymore, for sure. You know, obviously I was on the hunt. You know, I love pink ladies. Now, we live in an apple growing region, so if I do get a chance to go to one of our local orchards, I'll enjoy. But in terms of, you know, grocery store bought apples, Cosmic Crisp is definitely where I'm at. And I do love me a pecan as well. So, yeah, I mean, Malum, that sounds awesome. I mean, Draw Steel looks like it's going to have a very similar ability for the Malice to really shake things up, and I think that's going to be really, really, really cool as well. Back at my desk, I agree that GM meta currency softened the blow of GMBS as well. Mike Underwood mentioned it on a stream yesterday. Using fear for the enemy to run away, or when players roll a failure with fear, you use the move to stop them getting that what they want. Sure. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, it kind of is a sponsor placement. I mean, I think you should play Dragonbane. I think you should play Northern Reaches. You know, I think you should play Dragontide. You know. That is true. DH has random loot tables at least. I'm not saying that there are no random things as well, but yeah, I mean, I think a big part of now that doesn't necessarily mean that every single ancestry has to be available in a Dagger Reaches. We might, you know, we could say, hey, you know, it's not just carte blanche, anything goes, you know. And to be clear, the game already sort of really establishes that. I mean, we really already have, literally, I would say, the framework, right? You know, to say, hey, this is the sort of core, you know, this is the sort of core Dagger Reaches framework, and we may have some, you know, unique rules, and we may have some unique rules and elements to this, in which it might include certain ancestries and communities, and changes, you know, to that element. Now, someone asked a question. I think it was Cal, who said, "Are we going to see the 12 domains of Daggerheart?" So, I'm torn on this, because on one hand, a mega game like this provides me with a fantastic opportunity to play test my ideas and see if things work, which is cool. On the other hand, it also changes up the core game, which may go against my desire to educate people about Daggerheart. Secondly, if I do change up the game, now this isn't a horrible thing, because, you know, again, I spend a lot of money. I already spend a lot of money to run these games, like on Forge servers and stuff, and potentially Roll for Combat might be helping me out and hooking me up, because Forge has been sucking lately really bad, and our Northern Reaches games keep crashing. Anyways, as a result, you know, I might have some extra money anyways. But like, one of the things that I would be forced to do is to, you know, create my own Foundry module. And by forced, I mean I would hire somebody to do it. And to be fair, you might say that sounds crazy. Remember, I'm a business, like, so number one, my expenses for gaming is much higher than what an individual person would do. Number two, you know, I know people like Steven Glicker and other people who literally have teams of Foundry developers. But I would have to create a Foundry module to create this experience. Now, so that's the problem, Smendon. Because what is raw Daggerheart? What is raw Daggerheart? Because I promise you're already going to get people who are going to join the game and go, hey, like, can I be a brawler? Can I be? No, it's not in the SRD. It's not raw. That's not available in the game. What if during the course of the game, like the party or the people create a new domain and we create a new class or we create a new thing or a new subclass gets unlocked because it's specifically tied to the game? Well, that's no longer Daggerheart raw. So I think that that's part of the problem about that's kind of where we sort of run into a problem, which is that all of these games naturally evolve beyond it. And more importantly than that, I cannot stress this enough, right? Northern Reaches is not PF2. Dragontide is not Dragonbane. They are different games. And I think the games have always benefited from the fact that we do not feel like we are beholden to creating a 100% core PF2 experience or a 100% core Dragonbane experience. And there might be people who complain about this. And I would encourage them. I would say, hey, you can go create a community. You can go create your own game and run a game of core game of Dragonbane or run a core game of PF2. And as a member of the Knights of the Last Call Patreon, you'll get access to Forge servers, Foundry modules, everything that you need in order to run a game. A host of digital assets and digital libraries will support you for everything. Every game you run will earn you tickets that you can get free merch and free bonuses and stuff like that. But the whole point of a mega game is that it is a sort of a living, evolving, and breathing world. Now, that doesn't necessarily... None of that matters because, doing something like this would require so much work and effort. It's probably not realistic, and it probably will never actually, come to be anyways. But for those of you who don't know, there's only one problem. I'll get to that in a second. For those of you who don't know, I just like the idea of there being 12 domains in Daggerheart, and I just, because it's 12 is 12. So I've been working on this idea of what would Daggerheart look like if you had a 12 domain sort of order. And 12 domains, 12 levels. And it basically looks like this. So it's 12 domains. Every domain is opposed by another domain. And then when you go either hemisphere, because it's 6, each hemisphere has all 6 stats. So, for example, if you look at the top hemisphere, you have might, agility, finesse, knowledge, presence, instinct. And if you look at the bottom, you have might, agility, finesse, knowledge, instinct, presence. But if you look at the left, you have finesse, agility, might, instinct, knowledge, presence. If you have the right, you have knowledge, presence, instinct, agility, finesse, might. So each thing is mirrored. And then every domain is mirrored with another domain. So, for example, order is domained by or opposed by chaos. Elements or elemental is opposed by codex. Midnight is opposed by splendor. Cunning is opposed by valor. Primal is opposed by grace. And blade is opposed by prowess. Where blade is sort of the weapons domain, and prowess is sort of what would have been the bone domain, right? Very body centric and more about the brain and the body rather than the blade, right? Than the weapon. And so unfortunately, one of the things is there is no warrior. I mean, you totally still have a warrior, right? You just mix the blade and the prowess domain. So the warrior is just right here. So he's still there, right? The blade plus prowess. I mean, it's the same way that the brawler, right, doesn't exist in the core Daggerheart circle, right? But all you had to do is add right? Valor to bone, and you made the brawler. Well, I mean, it's no different. But in my core 12, you lose the warrior. I know it's heresy, but it's the only way I could make this work. The other thing that you gain, okay, for our persons is you gain, number one, you gain Blade is a, where's my, here we go. Blade, I gotta get my, here we go. Blade is a pure martial domain. Valor is a pure martial domain, but, okay, gonna be a fucking hoe, all right. Prowess is a pure martial domain, and Cunning is a pure martial domain. So now we have 4 pure martial domains. Number 2, you now have Cunning and Prowess next to each other. So you can basically create a martial rogue, right? So I call it a martial rogue stab. So, this is essentially where you could have a, and when I say martial rogue, I don't really mean a thief. I mean what most people's modern assumption of what a rogue is, right? Which is this like super elite kind of agility, finesse based warrior who, moves in the shadows and stabs people, bad, whatever. Sure, yes, but to be fair, the assassin is magical. The assassin has access to the midnight domain, and that makes the assassin, technically a magical assassin. Well, to be fair, Copperblint, in the core game, there's only 2 martial classes as well. So we're not really changing that in that respect. In the core game, the only pure martial classes are Warrior and Guardian. That's it. Unfortunately, you would need to, if you wanted to have another martial class, 2 of 9 does feel like 2 of 12. I mean, that is true. But again, I mean, it's technically now there are 4 martial domains. So now you can have a Valor and Blade, that's our Guardian, right? And you can have a Prowess and Cunning, that's your Rogue. And then you could have a Blade and Prowess, that's your Warrior. But now you can have a Blade and Cunning, and then you could have a Valor and Prowess, and you could have a Valor and Cunning. So technically there is more things that you could build. Technically, with 3 martial domains, the most martial classes that you can build is 3. And they've already built them all. Under my system, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So technically, I've doubled the number of martial classes that are available that you could make. Right? Technically. You just have to make them. If they make sense. Right, shards and wedges, baby. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, because again, with 2 martial domains, which is all that you have in the base domain, right? It's 2 + 1 = 3, and then with 3 martial domains, you have 3 + 2 + 1 = 6. So that's how you can keep going up from that perspective. Anyways, the reason that I bring all this up is because there we go. The other thing that this does, not that this is like a huge thing, but I know that people were kind of upset about it, is it does. I didn't have a problem with it. Let me be very clear about something. I didn't have a problem with it. Okay, I did not have a problem with a wizard who could heal, but I saw a lot of people who did. And while I am not ruling out the fact that the order domain might not have some kind of healing capability, so that you would kind of like the way that like you might be able to, both domains might have a heal available to them. The fact is now between Splendor is over here, Order is over here, so now we can have space for a priest, right, or a white mage, type character, in the game. So there is that. So yeah. I mean, I'm sure it will be an official class, of course, at some point. but yeah, I wanted to sort of fill out, and of course, otherwise, we have, and we talked about this before. This really isn't really even the ranger or the hunter anymore, because I think a lot of people think of the ranger and the hunter, and they think of something that is, I think more martial nowadays. Honestly, martial. So I don't even want to call that the ranger or the hunter. And we basically talked about this idea of like kind of a weapon user who is tied into the primal power source, which remember we talked about that in our version, the primal domain is actually a shape-shifting domain. So I kind of like the idea here of sort of like a monster hunter, or almost kind of like a blue mage type class. Like if someone wanted to make a hunter, we actually even talked about this, is that this martial rogue stab might be more of like the scout class, which we might also put /rogue/ranger, and that way you can kind of have your martial character over here. But anyways, and then you could potentially do that through the subclass as well. There's definitely a feel. I mean, when I was talking about my explanations, like a chimerist from Fabula Ultima. Yes. And yes, one of my major things here is Beastmaster as well. Martial is just another word for lame class. I mean, I kind of agree with you, because isn't the whole point of playing a fantasy game to play with fantastic things, which includes magic? That is true. You can. I have no problem with people healing as a wizard, potentially. But order is exactly what I had in mind when I was discussing a thaumaturgy domain the other day. Very sweet. Awesome. Exactly. Right? You're returning things to their natural state. Exactly. She just remakes Book of Nine Swords to make every martial discipline a domain. Yes, exactly. Well, that's the other thing too. I mean, I know I like to shit talk anime, but like the truth of the matter is, I believe truthfully that Daggerheart, I think Daggerheart is very anime coded. I do. I like, not saying that it's wrong or anything like that. Like, but I think watching Critical Role play Age of Umbra, I was kind of like, this just doesn't feel right. I just don't feel like that kind of grim kind. And again, it's just this is my personal opinion. There's nothing inherent in the game here. Fine. Western anime coded. I'm not an anime expert. I don't pretend to be. I just think that the sort of overall style of the abilities and is definitely kind of coded in that way. So the reason I bring all this up, other than we were talking about it today. So I actually posted a Patreon today. I was like, hey, look, there was an advantage for me sitting on a plane for 5 hours, which is that I came up with this. The idea that I had for Dagger Reaches is I wanted to kind of, to be honest with you, I kind of wanted to steal from Dragontide. Dragontide, again, Northern Reaches, Daggertide stole from Northern Reaches. And I've been seeing what's happening with Northern Reaches Season 3, and it's going really well. But one of the core ideas that we came up with Dragontide, which I think is really, really cool, is this idea that GMs. So the idea of Dragontide is that you have a archipelago of islands, and again, everything builds off of everything. Okay. I had this idea last year for Northern Reaches, not Season 2, but what was called SOBI, which is Southern Beaches, not Northern Reaches. It was Southern Beaches. And the idea was it took place in the Caribbean. And I always loved sailing and ships. And what we discovered is that it was really cool that GMs could have their own little island. So the idea of Dragontide, which again uses Dragonbane, is there is this sort of mysterious archipelago. And there is a city, the city of Stormhaven. And Stormhaven is totally not Stormreach, but it's totally Stormreach. Basically, take Stormreach, leave it where it is, and then shatter Zendrick into islands. And you would basically have the core aesthetic of what Dragontide is. Now, if that means nothing to you, great, cool. But if it does mean something to you, you understand where I'm going. And one of the advantages that we get with this is basically we can give every GM an island. And each GM is kind of free to sort of tell stories and do whatever they want on their island. They can build a little hex map. People can explore it. They can put adventure sites on it. In fact, potentially, maybe you make a really big island and a couple of GMs all agree to kind of work on the island together. Obviously, if you're GMing your island, you can't play on your island, but you could go visit someone else's island and you can kind of tell your own little stories there. The cool part is how what happens on your island, right, ends up affecting everything else. So that's, what makes it a mega game. That's what makes it a community game, is that what happens on your island can affect everybody else. But there is a downside to this, and the downside of this is that we are asking GMs to make Jacob Online, I mean, again, this is a very, very well-known thing here, which is that I'm a huge Earthsea fan. I mean, I love sailing. I've loved sailing since I was a kid. In fact, I am currently 42 years old, about to be 43 here. And my goal when I was like 25 years old is like, I'm going to work. At some point in time when I turn 42, after I turn 42, I'm going to retire. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to retire. I'm going to sell my possessions. I'm going to buy a boat. I'm going to live in the Caribbean for 6 to 7 months. And I will come home during, the winter. For the holidays, for Thanksgiving, maybe come home around my birthday, which is at the end of September, stay through Halloween and get to see the pretty fall, and stay through Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. And then when it gets into the shitty part of winter where I really start to hate the snow, I will leave. I'll go back to my boat, which I love, parked somewhere in the Caribbean, in Florida or whatever. I'll get it ready, and then I will leave, and I'll sail around until hurricane season is basically past, and then I'll dock the boat, and I'll come back home. And that was going to be my life. So I love sailing. I love boats. And part of that is because I love Earthsea. Sweet. So I have given up at this point on really owning a boat. It's just not right now, especially not. I don't have a job. But in my life, I have sailed a number of Hobie Cats. And I actually wanted to buy, believe it or not a Hobie Cat. I wanted to buy a Hobie Cat Getaway. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a very looked down upon boat. It's a very casual boat. It's not designed for speed. It doesn't have trapeze or anything like that, but it's really great for families. And the reason why I wanted to buy a Hobie Cat, believe it or not, I don't have kids, but my friends all have kids, and they are all ages, 6 to 12. And I just thought it would be really cool in the summertime to go out to the beach with my friends' families and, introduce their families, introduce their kids to sailing. And I think that the Hobie Cat would be really good. The Hobie Cat Getaway, specifically, would be really, really good for that. And I've sailed it before. It's impossible to. Well, I mean, you can capsize any, any dinghy, but it's a pretty stable boat. It's a catamaran. Anyways, I see some people who are already kind of figuring stuff out here. So I liked this idea a lot. But the problem with this idea is, unfortunately, and we've seen this kind of already come up, which is that some GMs are hesitant to want to build their own island. It's a lot of work. And each island is pretty small. So so I said, everything that we do here is a sort of amalgamation of different games and things that we've learned before. Well, back in Northern Reaches Season 1, inspired by MMOs, we actually had zones. Now, we still technically have zones, but they don't mean anything anymore. They're just flavor descriptors, okay? Back in Season 1, though, different zones had different effects, right? And a zone was a large area. So, what do we call a set of rules that sort of defines what makes an area unique? A framework. So I love the idea, which somebody hit upon, Sunhawk, of course, doing a frame for each island would be neat. I agree, but I'm not putting that on the GMs. So my idea was to instead create several large-ish, because I still like the island ideas, because it keeps things kind of separate. It keeps them kind of interesting. You could do it with regions. But the idea is that you would have several large areas. These would be equivalent to zones. These would be sort of a shared communal group. And each zone, if you will, would have its kind of own campaign frame that would sort of set the tone for the kind of adventures that you would expect to run there. So, for example, we might have a zone that is let's just call it what it is. Let's call it more combat focused. That doesn't mean that everything's a combat, everything's a thing. But the campaign frame may have some additional rules or some additional mechanics that make combat a little bit more prevalent and a little bit more often. And more important than that, it makes that the players, so that if a GM creates an adventure in this zone, the players signing up for it probably have a good idea of knowing what they're getting into. If they really don't like combat, if they really would prefer to do a lot more role-playing, a lot more social activities, if they're not that kind of bard or that kind of rogue, then they can avoid doing activities in that session. Now, that doesn't mean that they can never go there, of course. But, so I really like that idea. But so these could just be zones in the World of Warcraft sense, right? Where you go from Dun Morog to Loch Modan to the wetlands, right? And they're just kind of next to each other geographically. But I don't know how we got to this point. Oh, earlier this year? I don't know. Yeah, earlier this year, earlier in 2025. My group, the Knights of Last Call, right? We all got together and we built, we did I think a 3-session Fabula Ultima session, 0. And we built a collaborative world that we were going to play Fabula Ultima in. And it did not launch for a variety of reasons, but mostly because I was just kind of really tapped out, and I was already running Torchbearer for the patrons, and I was running all the streams, and it was just a lot. And Smith offered to run a game. He said he'd been kind of itching to run a game because I ran Forbidden Lands all last year, and so Smith hadn't GM'd in over a year. And he was like, hey, I can run a game. I said, okay, I'd appreciate that. So we kicked off our Pathfinder 2 campaign instead. But we had built a collaborative world, and I thought it was really cool. And the idea of our collaborative world was that you had a planet that had some sort of massive cataclysm, and it shattered. It exploded, if you will. It shattered, okay? But it didn't, explode out into space, right? It was a magical cataclysm. And so as a result of this, the planet is still kind of spherical, roughly. But instead, it is full of these massive, floating sort of, I don't want to say continent-sized, because anything that big got destroyed, right? But we'll call it, big island-sized, maybe the size of a small country, or like a U.S. size. And turned it into this sort of floating landberg type things, which we called shards. And one of the ideas so basically you have a planet that has been chunkified. And by the way, this is nothing new, right? Now, to be clear, there is no planet, right? It is chunks all the way down. Now, I did have ChatGPT, because we were talking about this earlier. I did have ChatGPT do something earlier. Now, this is where, again, I'm trying to see if I can find it. But in my Discord, I wrote down a list of what inspired me to create this. And I don't know. Oh, here we go. So what my core things that inspired me were the 4th edition Points of Light concept. It is also the 4th edition World Cosmology. If you're familiar with the 4th edition World Cosmology, you'll know that they abandoned the Great Wheel. It was Eberron. It was Planescape. It was Final Fantasy 6, 12, and 14. It was The Dark Crystal, the movie. It was Earthsea, the book. It was Treasure Planet. the Disney movie. It was Lady Blackbird, the small indie game from John Harper. It is Spelljammer. It is the Magic the Gathering setting that was formerly known as Kaladesh. Now I know it's called like Avestam or something like that, but most people know it as Kaladesh. The setting of Blades in the Dark, not necessarily the game set of not necessarily the game of Blades in the Dark. So this is kind of all what sort of inspired me. Aveshkar, thank you, Sunhawk, is what they call it now. But Kaladesh is sort of what inspired me. So these are all sort of the setting elements that I really, really wanted to explore. And also, let's see if I can find it. Here it is. The Fate expansion called Aethersea. This is also a sizable. Basically, if you look at that, yeah. So, anyways, this is from Fate Core. This was a Fate Core, one of their micro expansions. Anyways, Aethersea. So all this stuff combined, and you know what I should add to here. So I'll add that Aethersea, and I'll also add the Wild Sea, which is an RPG. Particularly, I don't even have it because it's in my bedroom because I was reading it. But the Storm and Root expansion to Wild Sea. So again, remember, Derek has read everything. Derek has everything. He's read everything. So this is obviously a very long list of inspirational sources. Anyways, one of the results of this is a super long tangent. One of the results of this, and I asked ChatGPT to make me a diagram that sort of reflects this. Let me see if I have it. Okay, here it is. And we did have a name for our Final Fantasy campaign. And it was called. So we called it. This is not final, but we called it the Shattered Lands. And so I asked ChatGPT to put together a side profile. So this is kind of like if you were looking at the planet from the side. So the idea is that you have this swirling set of chunks of swirling shards, right? Now at the center is still the burning core, the raw elemental energy, right? That sort of still thriving. There's no shards here. This is just a rolling ball of pure, raw, roiling energy, right? And if you're familiar with the 4th edition cosmology, this is very similar to, chat, come on, someone here is a 4th edition aficionado. I'll wait for it. I'll wait for chat to sort of to bring this out here. Elemental chaos. Fantastic. Exactly. So for those of you who don't know, this is the way that 4th edition outlaid its it didn't have the great wheel, cosmology, but you have this sort of raw elemental energy. Then you have the shards, if you will call them that are closer to the core. And this is places of like raw elements, right? Almost like primal energy. Then above that, you kind of get the mid levels. Okay. Now this is going to be where most of the campaign takes place. These are neither too close to the core, but they aren't too far away either. Then above, so this is sort of our prima terra, right? This is where most of the campaign would take place, because to go further down into the core, right, the things become more, yes, the metaphysical Goldilocks zone, Jake. That's a really good way of putting it. Because to go deeper into the core, hey, good night, Edward. Thank you again for stopping by and hanging out with us. I really appreciate you. Shout out everything. Good night, Edward. Metaphysical Goldilocks, right? If you go down, right, things become more chaotic. They become more elemental, more raw. As you go above this, right, you're getting closer and closer to basically the edge of space. And the way I'm envisioning it is that there's this sort of, this is again very Lady Blackbird, Aether Sea coded, which is that while you are within the domain of what used to be the planet, there's this sort of mysterious aether, right, which fills space, which means that you can basically breathe. The ships that sail between these things do not need oxygen bubbles, right? But as you actually get towards basically what is fucking outer space, right, it gets colder and right, and things start to kind of crystallize. And the way I sort of envision it is that the aether itself becomes more structured, right? Here it is roiling energy, but as you get further up, as it kind of cools down, the aether becomes more like structured and forms these like lattices. You can almost think of it as being crystalline. You could think of it as being like structured and ordered. So it has its own danger, right? As you sort of get higher and higher. Now, Mecha Maya is getting what I'm pointing at. Chaos below, order above. But also remember that down here in the depths near the core, right? So if there is a sun, right, which I assume there is, right? When you're near the core, you have essentially an entire planet's worth of shards above you. Now, the planet blew up a little bit, but there's still a lot of shards above you. So I imagine that down here near the core, it is actually quite dark, right? Very shadowy, right? Because there's nothing between you and, but there's tons of, you know, you can imagine if you put hundreds, if not thousands of huge island-sized floating landbergs above you for many, many, many hundreds of miles, not a lot of sunlight is going to get to you down here. So it's dark. As you move outwards towards the edge, right, the atmosphere starts to fall away, the aether starts to flow away, and now you get the blinding light, right, of the sun. It's shining down on you. It is very, very cold, but it's very, very bright, okay? And it's very, very structured. Now, you say, shouldn't the core be giving illumination? I mean, that's if you're assuming that the core is like some sort of glowing ball of energy mass. It could also be sort of a roiling ball of elemental darkness. I mean, fire is bright, but earth and water and air aren't necessarily, you know, brightly illuminated. And it's more of like, sure, there might be, and again, I would argue that, Kyle, that the light that you get there is practical, right? It's not from the sun, right? It might be eternally dark, except for that flowing river of lava that's arcing through the air, right? Otherwise it is dark. Like the sun does not reach down to those depths, right? So now when you look at my domain circle and you realize that this is the, to be fair, Copper Blint, yes, that's because ChatGPT, you know, it just did what it thought a core of a world should look like. But when you look at my structure diagram, you can see that the so-called upper domains are order, splendor, codex, right? It is structured. It is bright, right? It is this sort of practical language of speaking magic, essentially taking raw magic and giving it structured form. As you move down, you have chaos, raw elemental energy, and of course, it is not bright, it is dark. It is the power of midnight. So there's this idea of the domain structure actually mapping to the world structure. And then in the middle, you have what I would call the very like sort of more, right? All four of the martial domains are in the middle, right? Because the middle land, the middle layer is probably the quote unquote least magical. So the middle domains are the least magical. The valor, blade, prowess, and cunning. And, you know, grace and primal sort of tap into those sort of darker or brighter areas, but, you know, but they're not fully embracing it, right? So there's this kind of idea of this sort of primal law and chaos kind of effect going on with this idea. Here, well, Oh no, it's a dark sun. There we go. It's not a burning sun. It's a dark sun. So I just like. I mean, this is like one of those things where I like to say, like I like for things to thematically sort of tie together. But this is basically a sort of variant of the 4th edition world cosmology. But it also has a very strong Eberron cosmology. And Eberron cosmology, for those of you who don't know, is this idea of the dragon below, the dragon between, and the dragon above, right? Sybaris, Eberron, and Kyber, okay? And this all goes into the Eberron campaign concept and how the world exists. But it's basically the same idea. And this idea that in Eberron, you have this, like, shard of this, like, endless ring of glittering crystal magic dragon spinning shards that orbit the planet, which once represented the dragon Sybaris, and then locked into the darkness in the core of the planet below is the dragon below, Kyber, which is like the source of evil and darkness. Now, while I may not necessarily associate this 100% with evil, it does represent chaos. And I think that's important is because I want all of the heroes to be able to use these and not necessarily be evil, right? Now, these domains kind of purposely avoid sort of alignments. Now, that may change with the addition of something like Dread. And that would actually fundamentally represent something new influencing this cosmology, right? Now, what I am imagining then is that somewhere here in the middle, there is some great city that is on a fairly stable shard. That's those big floating sky islands, right? From which people can go and explore these shattered lands. And this is where we get this idea of sigil from Planescape. And because each shard, this is a magical cataclysm. I mean, this shard may be covered in giant glaciers and frozen waterfalls, and this shard could basically be like Gehenna. Like you have a lot of latitude, right, with the kind of because it's all magical and all bullshit, and you're kind of making up as you go along, anyways. And so you kind of basically end up having this kind of very sigil-like feeling. Now, instead of portals, which are really boring, I like the idea of sky ships and elemental trains. So, again, none of this is written in stone, but that's kind of the idea. Now, of course, this is Daggerheart, so there's the idea is that there's because so with so this is kind of a side tangent. I still like the idea that some GMs may want to do their own things. And as a result of that, you might have your central hub city here. And in Dragontide, we have this idea that everything's an island and you have to get to it with a boat. The problem, honestly, it is a problem, is we kind of had to fudge our way into it. It wasn't really an elegant solution. Is well, what if you don't have a boat, and what if you don't care about a boat? Dragontide requires boats. You need boats to get to the islands. It just is a requirement. So my idea is what we can do is that, again, this is about a points of light setting. So in points of light setting, right, most of these, this was a pretty nasty cataclysm. And even though society has sort of recovered from it, most of these shards are still going to be fairly, right, they're going to be fairly, untamed, in terms of what is going on there. It's going to be fairly wild terrain. So there might be some sort of vast mountain range that, is made of the ancient shards of some sort of god's body or whatever like that. But there might be a point of light. Maybe there's a couple points of light on this shard that you can that it sort of represents a sort of bastion of society. And I'm envisioning is that you might have these sort of initial points of light connected by this sort of aether network or aether rail that people can travel by to kind of get where they're going. And that way players can sort of move from that. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a cool reason for us to have cool skyships. And because skyships are really important to me, because I do like the movie Treasure Planet, and I love I love Lady Blackbird, and I love Spelljammer. And so one of those ideas might be that one of the things that we could eventually include as sort of a DLC or of an expansion, right, is the creation of a new shard, right? A new shard is discovered, right? And there is no aether rail station to this shard. This is a sort of literally an unknown island. The other thing, which I did like from Dragontide, is I wanted to give some GMs, I would call them more advanced GMs. So remember, these large, again, they're not continent sized, but you could think of them as being the size of, let's say, Germany or the UK or maybe Ohio or Texas, right? We're talking hundreds of miles by hundreds of miles, but it's not a full continent, right? But it's big enough that you could explore it almost endlessly. For essentially, you could set a lot of adventures there. But I do like the idea for some GMs as more advanced GMs, and we call these shards. And I did like the idea as an option to allow some GMs to include what we are calling, or what I'm calling, fragments. And basically, a fragment is just a small literal island size. These are hundreds of miles or hundreds of kilometers, and this is maybe tens of miles and tens of kilometers. But these are basically the asteroids. If these are the planets of our system, these are the moons. These are the smaller things, and this gives GMs an option to sort of create a truly unique experience where they can kind of make their own rules and not necessarily be tied into the rules of these core shards. Now, I don't necessarily know that that's going to possibly be, something that people are going to be interested in, but this is something that I want to give experienced GMs, or if we want to create a truly unique place that maybe has some very special rules that we would never want to have applied to a large number of people all at once. It's a very specific area. And these fragments are obviously not going to be connected to the shards by the aether rail. So you would need some sort of skyship to get to them. So they're almost kind of already kind of like at an advanced level of the campaign where you need to have an appropriate skyship to go out and explore it. And high-level dungeon, absolutely. I mean, Cal even said, fragment equals Caverns of Thracia. Exactly, that kind of stuff. Exactly. So, right, a necropolis shard. You could just do a lot of stuff here. So we have this concept that we can kind of explain here. And we can obviously do stuff like this. For example, Copperblint, absolutely. And this is where I said the fiction, Daggerheart rules matter, but they don't matter as much as they matter in Pathfinder 2. That is just the truth of the matter is. So we could have a shard where your hope die is D10, right? We could have a shard where the fear die is always a D20 or something crazy, right? Like we can really bend these and break these rules and create some truly unique stuff. And more importantly, Copperblint, with these fragments, we can get really wild and crazy because nobody's forcing you to go there. And ideally, you would know what the rule is before that. No. Copperblint is right on the spot, right on the money. We can do whatever we want. And it kind of doesn't matter because, you ready for it? You can't fucking die. It's just, the fact of the matter is that, like, even if some GM creates some completely crazy and insane thing, every player can just choose to avoid death. So it works out. Jake says, having everything about this tied into the metaphysics and cosmology, depending on their relative location, is a great excuse to have different rules. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, Cal, you could literally do an infinite number of things. But Sunhawk is running their Daggerheart as a sci-fi, and they made a bunch of locations like a derelict battleship, a pirate station. Exactly, exactly. So that is that's the basic, and that's the basic kind of gist of what the structure of the world is going to look like. Now, does this sound a little bit like Northern Reaches? Yeah. Does this sound a little bit like Dragontide? Yeah, and that's kind of that's part of the reason that I did this is because those were really good ideas, and we sort of evolve as we sort of go from this. Now, there's other ideas too that I kind of want to steal, copy, crib, and even create from whole cloth for this component. But from a structural standpoint, this is what I'm doing. All of this was a tangent to explain why I might be tempted to want to include this. The only reason is because obviously I've been thinking about this structure at the same time as I've been thinking about how I would change Daggerheart. And, before you know it, I'm like, well, now I've got this idea because now these domains actually mean something, right? You're actually drawing upon the energy of different parts of this sort of world shard. And that's sort of pulling in your energy, and it can kind of change the feel of it. Now, do we need this? No, of course not. We could just do full random. We could just do normal Daggerheart. But I question how good normal Daggerheart is. I mean, are you telling me that if we started this campaign and they officially released, let's say, Brawler, Witch, and Warlock, that you wouldn't want to be like, oh, we should start, playing with that. We're not doing any of that. Cal. Full random domains. No random. So Copper says you could do so much with Daggerheart because it's so flexible with the mechanics. Players cannot clear stress whenever they rest here. Players reduce their damage rolls. But you could do anything, Copperblin. That's what you're absolutely right. And the thing is like if you do some of this stuff and you do it too much, and here's the difference at its fundamental level. Pathfinder 2 is a game about competition. The GM is setting out challenges before you, and you are going to use the math of the game. You are going to use the balance assumptions of the game. You are going to make the feat choices that you made in the game to overcome those challenges. And the GM is expected to abide by the rules and provide you with an appropriate level of challenge. So fundamentally, the game is about having a fair fight, right? You made all your choices under the assumption that you are going to have a fair fight. So in Daggerheart, I fundamentally believe, even though people were kind of roasting me a little bit on Reddit for this, that doesn't mean that Daggerheart tactics don't matter. It doesn't mean that Daggerheart but I don't think Daggerheart is a game about competition. I don't think Daggerheart is a game about seeing if you can win. It is a game about truly embracing whatever happens. It's about embracing the right thing that happens for that moment in the story based off how the dice go. It's not about winning. It's about creating stories. It's about and embracing the randomness of the game. And I completely agree with Copper, which is I think the battle points in the CRB give people the entirely wrong about Daggerheart encounters, and I could completely agree. Now, I did say to one of those comments, just because tactics isn't first doesn't mean I think tactics is last. Obviously, one of the reasons I enjoy Daggerheart is specifically because it has these additional combat choices and combat options. But to be very clear, I do think that they are somewhat performative. I really do. And I say that because, number one, the GM has access to fear, and they can kind of make up whatever they want. The GM can take moves whenever they want. That's very clearly written in the game. The players can avoid death whenever they lose. If the players do lose, they could say, fuck it, we ball, choose to defy fate and roll, and they happen to roll high with their hope, and they clear all their stress and all their hit points, and they're back in the fight at complete full. So, what does carefully balanced encounter even mean in the context of a game like that? Sure, it might matter in terms of, are my players even going to be able to hit this guy or not, which is fair. But in terms of, the actual outcome to that battle, it means almost nothing. What's more important is, why are you fighting and what happens as a result of it? And I think that's far more compelling, for sure. So actually, I kind of disagree. I don't think that a game has to be tactical to be challenging. Or rather, I don't think that, yes, I think that just because a game has tactics doesn't mean it has to be challenging. You know how I know that, Mateo? Because Pathfinder 2 and D&D 5th edition exist. And the reason I say that is because 99% of combats that are played in those systems, the players win every time. So I don't know what you would call something there where the players win. Let's be generous. Let's be very generous and say 95% of the time the players win. I mean, in any other world or you would say that is a slaughter. You would say that this isn't even fair. This is Major League Baseball players going up against, I don't know, Pony League players. Yes, there is a random chance, maybe once every 100 years, that the Pony League players would win. But the Major League Baseball players are going to win every single time. But that's D&D, But that's just it, Mateo. That's also not true for Pathfinder 2 or for D&D 5e. It's not. You just have to use the abilities that are on your character sheet. So what to me tactics means is that you have to make decisions. And that you have the option to make different decisions, and that your decision tree and that your decision texture is changing all the time. I think that is very true. And that is very exciting. And that is making cool choices. And, they're all good. They're all fun choices. They're all different choices. But the game is still tactical. This is like in board game what they call a point salad game. In a point salad game, like everything you do gives you points. And the objective of the game is to get the most points. And in a point salad game, everything you do gives you points. But, there's different ways to get points. And sometimes you might go over here and get points, and sometimes you might over here and get points. They all give you points. And maybe, yes, if you have the cheese grater, you've purchased the cheese grater option, then when you go to the cheesemonger, you get more points because you took the cheese grater, and now the cheesemonger space gives you more points than it would if you didn't have the cheese grater. Cool. And so you've created a better point engine. But yes, some points are more equal than others. But, fundamentally, you still have a ton of choices, and the choices that you made matter, but it's not about winning or losing. So I don't think tactical has to be competitive, Or, I'm sorry, yeah, tactical has to be challenging. Yeah. And I also completely agree with Kyojin, which is the battle points have meant very little once you start playing, in my experience. The balance and challenge is almost entirely GM up to once the play input, 100%. Because is a GM making fucking, cutthroat hard moves and pushing, or is the GM using their moves when the players roll with fear, or the GM cashes in a fear point? Is the GM making soft moves? Is the GM giving the players choices? Are they putting the players in a tough spot and asking them a question, or is the GM just hammering their strongest opponent? Like, they have a bunch of other right? You could play Daggerheart like this. Here's a balanced encounter. There's a solo and a couple low-level minions and another creature, and it's a balance point thing. And it's like, okay, you roll with fear, I'm going to activate my boss, and I'm going to spend a fear point to activate the solo. Okay, and now I've used all my actions. Back to the player. Okay, you rolled. Ooh, you succeeded with fear. I'm going to use that fear. I'm going to use my free activation to activate the boss. And then I'm going to spend a fear to activate the boss. And I'm going to only activate the boss. In fact, I'm never going to activate any of the other monsters because they suck, and I just want to use this really powerful boss. And I'm not going to make a single GM move other than Spotlight and Adversary. And I'm going to use as much fear as I have available to use the most powerful fear effects that I have available to me on that monster. And I'm going to activate it as many times as Relentless would allow me to. You could play Daggerheart like that. So, but another GM might play that completely different. So what does the balance even mean? What does the balance build points even mean? It doesn't really mean anything. All it's really telling you is, are these numbers even remotely kind of close to what the players are going to be able to comfortably hit and feel like they're not just, whacking into a adamantine wall? Is how I really view it. And I think there are great games for this. And to be clear, Hawking, this is one of the reasons I was very disappointed when I read Draw Steel, because that game seemed to be like what you were leading to. And then Draw Steel has this section, not just an optional rule, but like a rule that says, oh, by the way, the GM can just fudge the monster's hit points whenever they want. Like, I'm curious, Hawking, would you feel like you earned your victory if you knew the GM was just changing the hit points behind the screen whenever they needed to in order to make the fight cooler? I don't think you would, which is why I thought that was a really lame decision that they put that in there. I also agree with Jake, right? Long story short, if I put a really high-level monster into my Pathfinder 2 game, I am kind of being a dick. I know my players can never defeat that, and if it does fight them, realistically, it is going to kill them. They should learn to run away, is what the OSR people say. Well, yeah, good luck with that. Number one, people don't run away. Number two, you really can't run away. It's just like not really, it's just not how the game works. You just can't do it, you know? So anyways. So, and Hawking says, hell no. I think I felt very safe answering for you. So anyways, you know, that's kind of one of the long and the shorts of it. Now, you know, because this is where we kind of get into this idea of like, I mean, I couldn't say it better than Highs' Eyes did right here. I imagine it's more about grist for the mill than challenge in a game like Daggerheart. It's making sure the combat has enough cool stuff rather than trying to make it a genuine challenge. And I personally completely believe that. I think that the combat in Daggerheart serves the same purpose as the social encounter, as the traversal environment, as as a thrilling chase in the scene. It's designed to create cool cinematic moments that are going to look really cool. You know, and your players are going to feel like that was a lot of fun. And I got to use my cool little abilities, and I got to pull out my cards, and I got to, you know, whatever, you know. So, yeah, I mean, that's fun. You know, using your cool little powers on your cool little cards is fun. It's fun, you know. Zenbull says, I had my players well trained for combat as sport, and then somebody else ran 5e for 3 years, and it ruined everything. You had them well trained for combat as war, is what you're saying. Good night, Cal. I'll talk to you later. We'll see you. We'll see you on the Discord. Oh, absolutely, Smendon. I have absolute sympathy for GMs who might be having to deal with this. You know, I mean, in a game like Dragonbane, there's literally no CR system. You know, the monsters in this bestiary are just monsters. You know, like, this is a chimera. Sorry, Freely. I mean, I'm showing your book. This is a chimera. And, you know, it has ferocity 3 and 42 hit points. And this is its monster attack table that is a d6 that you roll randomly to determine what monster attack it makes. There is no challenge rating. You know why? There's not even a level in Dragonbane. Should I throw a chimera at my party in the first session? I mean, why not? I mean, should I throw it at them after 20 sessions? Sure. There's no right answer. And the answer is, what does that even mean anyways? It just doesn't mean anything. So, you know, people talk about these battle points and stuff like that because I do think people would like have lost their minds and their shit if they hit it. Now, is Dragonbane a tactical game? People who play Dragonbane will very much tell you it's a very tactical game. It has no concept of challenge rating at all. So, you know, the fights are what the fights are. There's no wrong monster or right number of monsters to throw at the party, you know? Jake, I was listening to Lazy GM. I love Mike Shea. Talk about his first experience running Daggerheart. He really liked it, but he struggled with the game's lack of initiative. You need to get that DSM video out. DSM. What is a DSM video? You have to tell me what DSM video is. I mean, I do, again, I appreciate people who, dynamic spotlight management. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's another area where, again, people are really going to, I love how people, I don't know what my own term is. Yeah, definitely. I mean, people are going to struggle there as well, too, you know, for sure. Let's see. Mateo says, it's kind of funny. In my Daggerheart campaign, marking full hit points marking full HP is scary for my players because most of them will only roll Risk It All. And we've already lost a PC to Risk It All. So there's a real fear. But here's the thing, Mateo. That is a choice. And I cannot describe for you how much more empowering it is to be able to make a choice. When a player makes a choice to roll Risk It All and then it comes up and they lose a PC to that, the feels that you have as a player and as a group are completely different than when you feel like you died to some arbitrary nonsense. Conversely, if you're fighting a really tough fight and it's like maybe it's a fight you're supposed to lose and like 2 players go down, they're making progress, by the way. They're chopping down the monsters, but these things are tough. And then 2 players go down and they both Risk It All. And let's say like one rolls a 10 on the hope and the other one rolls like a crit or something, and they both come back, right? Like stronger than ever. Like people are going to be high-fiving around your table in a way that you would just never. The only way you would see that is if like somebody like crit back to back or something like that in D&D, and that's going to be a huge moment. And your party's going to talk about that for a long time because it was like a fight they were supposed to lose and then they didn't, and that's awesome. So again, the fact that rule exists, that you could roll the Risk It All rule and like someone could just come back to like literally if you roll a crit, they just come back at 100%. Already means that the concept of balance is already kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, the don't die option is one that you need to get used to. Surrender is fantastic, and to be clear, they call it avoid death, but it's the same thing as surrender, basically in Fabula Ultima for sure. The idea being that it gives the GM permission to fuck with the world, to fuck with the things that you care about, right? To fuck with your bonds, to fuck with your origin, to fuck with your whatever, but not to kill you, because in that way, death is a release, not a punishment. Yeah, exactly. See, the Age of Umbra and when the actions when players were making the death move choice, it was some of the most fun they were having in the game because that is like a truly like put it on the line, The problem with Risk It All is, as a Magic player, I know I'm never going to be punished for being greedy. I mean, you are somewhat true to that. I mean, you'll always get to make a new character, right? Cardboard Enjoy says, basically one of the most boring parts of 5e got turned into one of the most hype things in Daggerheart. That's a great way to put it. That is a great way to put it. Absolutely. Avoid death does not mean get out of jail free card. It does not. It means you don't die, right? But that everything else gets worse. And that some of the things, again, I talked about before this idea of, it's one of the video topics that we're going to eventually cover. But I talked about that, like in Daggerheart, even getting to the point where maybe you should have your players write down on their character sheets, what is your character's hope and what is your character's fear, and really lean into that, especially when they avoid death. Because when they avoid death, attack their hope, and when they avoid death, embrace their fear, and lean into that and make that happen. The only thing I personally feel about Risk It All is that if I fail, I wish I would have taken Blaze of Glory. At that point, that's we can only give you so much, it's like, hey, listen, you knew the chances, you knew the risks. You gotta be a grown up. You gotta take your lumps when you take them. There's no free moments. Now, Scott says, I wish there was a game with the Daggerheart bones, fear, hope, spotlight, but not so absurdly anime fantasy classes. Yeah, Scott. You could definitely use this exact same framework, Scott, and create a much more lower-powered version of the domains. You kind of don't even really need the domains. You could just have a basic framework of classes. Scott, that sounds awesome. It's kind of a OSR heart, more lower powered, more, gritty, more grounded. You could absolutely do that. And I think just the core D12 hope, fear, spotlight thing, at that point, you're kind of running, kind of a version or a variant of Dungeon World, basically. So I can't be entirely sure, Mateo. I don't remember what the rule is specifically in the book. But I don't recall what exactly happens when you die. I thought you were kind of out, like, of the situation. But maybe you're not. Let's see here. Let's see here. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, so you can get brought back. Okay, very cool. Right. You can stack up a lot of scars that way, for sure. Correct. I mean, I think that's the key, right? Like anything in Daggerheart, the consequences have to match the equation, I completely agree, Cardboard Enjoyer. I completely agree. If someone wants to do that, that's fine, but realize that that's going to have... So actually, I'm glad that I actually looked at that. You know why? Okay, I know I don't usually say this. It's actually something I don't like about Fabula Ultima. In Fabula Ultima, if your character goes to 0 hit points, you can choose to surrender or go out in a blaze of glory. There is no risk at all. Obviously, if you go out in a blaze of glory, I can't recall what it's actually called in Fabula Ultima. Sacrifice. Oh, surrender or sacrifice. So you can sacrifice. Your character dies, and you accomplish some incredible, amazing thing. Now, to be clear, I like sacrifice better than blaze of glory. So to be fully transparent, in any of my games, Blaze of Glory will not say what it says in the book. So in Blaze of Glory, in the Daggerheart book, says your character embraces death and goes out in a blaze of glory. Take one action at the GM's discretion, which critically succeeds, then cross through the veil of death. Fuck that. No, you're going to do more than just critically succeed, right? This is your character's cashing in their ticket. This is going to be more than a critical success. It's going to feel a lot more like a sacrifice. You are going to be able to accomplish something incredibly powerful and mighty, and then go out. Maybe even to the point where your character kind of holds out for a few, fictionally, your character might hold out for a few minutes, right? Buying the party time, holding off an entire, undead legion to give the party enough time to get back to the ship and launch and, sail away into the aether sky, right? Fundamentally, it's not just, oh, you crit on one of the monsters and then you're dead. No, that is the fucking, if anybody has done that anywhere, I'm ashamed of you to a certain extent. I know that's what the rule book said, but this is, those things where people go, you can do whatever you want, whatever says in the rules. You know what? Just do something else. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be, I'm talking Hodor, hold the door type level, right? And that is an extended scene, Oh my God. Did he really? Did he really? Did he really? Did he really? Oh man. I didn't. I mean, I did. I don't. Definitely didn't see that episode, but maybe. Wasn't bad. Okay. Still. Duncan Idaho in the Dune movie. That dude did a lot more than crit. Okay. That dude held off an entire squadron, arguably 2 squadrons, of Sardaukar. And I don't need to tell you that that is incredible. Not to mention he took out like 8 or 9 or 10 of them before he died. Okay. That is what a blaze of glory should look like. But similarly, what I don't like in Fabula Ultima is that when your character surrenders, your character's out of the fight. There's no bringing you back. You can't be healed back into the fight. There's no Phoenix down to bring you back in the fight. So what I don't like about that is if the parties have this really cool fight and your character, gets hit really early, and your character goes down to 0 hit points and you surrender, you might even be forced to surrender. You can't sacrifice if there's not a villain present in the scene. You are literally compelled to just sit on the sidelines. You cannot get back in. And I find that to be very unappealing. Well, there definitely needs to be a lot of guidelines, Derek. That is for sure. Like about what this game is about, because I cannot force you to fiction forward has to be, has to be the name of the game. But we would probably have to change some rules around death and scars and resurrection and some of that elements and stuff of that, like stuff of that nature. For sure. We'd have to think about that, basically, is what it comes down to. Well, at least some people thought it was very cinematic, in which case, bravo, Matt. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual core elements of the game, what we would have to change, not that much. I think it would be mostly about the principles. Yes, I think it would be about the for players and GMs. I agree, Smendon. That would be really, really important. Now, there would also probably be some general rules. Like we would have to, again, this is where we get into like more of like the meta mechanics of the fight, of the encounter. When I say meta mechanics, I mean things like we might say that, you can't long rest during a game session. That like you can only long rest basically like back at the hub city, right? Because these are, you can only long rest at a point of light, like a true place of order and safety and security. You can only short rest narratively when you're out on these adventures. And we would also talk about what I'm calling like sort of hope and fear. Yeah, I think we would keep the 3 short rests before long rest. I mean, we might have to make some additional rules for if like a session is really long or something like that. All right, we were just trying to keep these things sort of on point and unbalanced. But like this is getting kind of off of Daggerheart and more into the mega game things. But this is like stuff that we've learned. So one of the most important things that happens in the mega game is this idea of the players as a group want to, or maybe even as an individual, they want to proactively do things. Aaron Smith, my good friend and very smart man, once said that everything in a role-playing game, in his experience and what he enjoys, is the ability to change the fictional situation, right? To update the fictional situation. Basically, to be proactive and to make things happen in this fictional world, to change the fictional world, whether that's killing a monster or building a new town or building a tower, a wizard's tower, right? It's the ability to make a change and impact these fictional worlds, and we do these in these community games, but you get to do them with strangers. You get to do them with a variety of other people. So those things are very, very popular, and so a great example of this might be like, let's say there's a new shard, right, that has been discovered, and there's a small fledgling town here, right, and a group wants to connect, wants to build a new Aether rail network to connect this town to the main network. So the community might make a project that is something like build a rail, right, and historically, the way that this has worked is it's kind of up to the GM to decide whether or not the adventure makes this progress, or the players have to use their, this is a Northern Reaches Season 3 thing, they have to use their downtime actions to make this happen. What I like the idea of is that players during a session will receive or recover what I'll call very abstract rewards. Gold is, handfuls of gold is one example of an abstract reward, right? The GM just says, you gain 5 handfuls of gold, right? It's a very abstract reward. It's basically using that same idea, but just having a couple different resources. And when the players get back to town, they can choose as an individual how they want to contribute and spend their resources. And they can contribute them to different projects. You got it. Aether cores, quantum nuggets, you got it. In fact, I think I made a list somewhere. Let's see if I have a list here somewhere. Trying to find my relationships here. No. Where are my? No. Oh, actually, this is a great question. I can actually talk to you guys about this. Man, I have a lot of notes about this that I've been jotting down here. No. Oh, I think it was like Aether, relics. I don't know if this is the list that I was thinking of. Relics, lore, and influence. These are kind of variants from Dragontide that we already want to do. Yeah, scrap and motherboard is a great example of that. It's just another example of that kind of idea. And again, the idea here is that this is sort of something that doesn't really necessarily affect the actual gameplay of the game that you're playing at that much. It's more of like something that you would do offline with your character and kind of decide, hey, I went on these adventures, I got these relations, everything like that, blah, blah, blah. Also, I'm a sucker for certain things. So like, for example, like this shard, right, might give you more relics. It can give you all of the resources, but maybe this shard is known for its relics. This shard is known for its, aether, et cetera, et cetera. So while I don't necessarily want to do that, I don't necessarily want to necessarily have this idea of a mega fear pool. I do like the idea of
Goblins and androids tip $10.
Hey.
Armonket for life, and good morning.
Good morning, Goblins and Androids. Yes, Amonkhet is another sweet game. You could definitely do a really cool Daggerheart Egyptian theme, Egyptian themed thing. But I love the Amonkhet set. I thought it was so flavorful and so cool, and I thought the abilities in it were so neat. It was some of my favorite Magic that I played. I do have a funny Hour of Devastation story though, which I will tell because Goblins and Androids tip $10. So for those of you who don't know. There used to be these things called Grand Prix in Magic the Gathering. And a Grand Prix is basically a big open tournament, which is a Swiss tournament. You play 9 rounds on day 1. And usually if your record is 7 wins and 2 losses or better, you get to play the next day where you will play 6 rounds. And then whoever has the 8 best records at the end of 15 rounds of play will play in a top 8, which is potentially up to another 3 rounds, and that's how you determine who's the winner of your tournament. Well, they will do tournaments that are called sealed tournaments. These used to be a thing where you are given 6 packs of a Magic the Gathering, and you make the best deck that you can, and you play that. Well, I drove. Tournaments usually ran Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. and then again on Sunday from 10 a.m. to whenever. There was a tournament in Indianapolis, which is about a 5-hour car drive. I couldn't get down on Friday. So I had to wake up super early on Saturday. I drove my car on Saturday, 5 hours. I got there for this tournament. It was Hour of Devastation, which was the second set in the Amonkhet set block. And I got there, and I had been playing enough Magic at the time that I actually got to start with 1 win. So it was called a bye because I had enough Planeswalker points. So I basically started at 1-1. And so then I played my round 2, and I was 1-1, and I lost, and I was kind of upset about it. But it was well-matched things. So then I go into round 3. And basically, if you get 2 losses this early in the game, you're just out of it. So I'm sitting down in round 3 to play my opponent. And in match, and you play best of 3 matches, so you play 3 matches. So in match 1 of 3, my opponent plays this card called the Scorpion God, which is a mythic rare, and it's almost completely unbeatable. It is one of the top cards of the entire set. It can't be killed. It's indestructible. It is essentially an auto win card. By the way, this card is red and black. And my opponent plays it, and I mean, just completely destroys me. The Scorpion God, unbelievably powerful, right? Scorpion God, OP, right? So I lose. So now we're going in. So it's best of 3. So they've got game 1. So we're going to game 2, and my deck cannot kill this creature. It just cannot kill this creature. But I knew I had in my pool, because I opened up 6 dice. I knew I had 2 white spells that exile a creature. Which can remove one of these gods from play. It's different. You're not killing it, you're exiling it. My deck was not white, but I was like, this is the only way I can win. So I get up, I go over, I get some planes, I rebuild my deck. You're allowed to do this. Between rounds of play with my opponent, I rebuild my deck. I put in some planes, I take out a few cards, my mana is going to suck, and I put in these 2 white cards. I think they're like 4 and a white, and it says, like, it's sorcery speed, and it says exile target creature. So pretty bad costed removal, but whatever. I need some way to deal with these creatures. I just cannot beat this guy if he draws a Scorpion God. So I put in these 2, and I think, yes. All right. So the match begins, and my opponent, take care, Tama. Good seeing you. My opponent, we're playing, and sure enough, on time, right on time, they tap out. They have their red and their black mana. They play a Scorpion God. And I'm like, and now they're tapped out, so they can't use all of its broken abilities, which are really crazy. They put all these negative counters, you draw cards, it's a whole thing. And I basically say, I need to draw one of my white exile removal spells right now. And I draw for the turn, I draw it, and I draw it, and I exile the Scorpion God. And I was like, yeah, it felt so sweet. My opponent looks a little perturbed, but doesn't seem to care. Goes to take their turns. Plays an island, hadn't seen one of those before, and then proceeds to cast the Scarab God, which is an even more broken and even more OP, unbeatable, indestructible Uber God that will destroy everything in the game. And they pass the turn to me. And I draw for turn. It was not the other white spell in my deck that could possibly kill this creature. I did not say anything to my opponent. I put my cards down in front of me. I had my play mat. They give you a play mat when you join the GP. You get a little box of cards. I did not sign the slip. I was in such a state of tilt. I literally stood up. I didn't say. My opponent was like, is something, what's going, like, they didn't understand what's going on. I literally stood up. I got my backpack off of my back of my chair, put it on me, and I walked away. I didn't sign the slip. I left my cards there. I left my playmat there. I left the deck box that they give you there. I left my slip. I just left it there. I stood up. I walked straight out of the convention center, straight to my car. Keep in mind, I'd woken up at like 5 a.m, drove all day to get there, got there, lost like this, and I just walked straight to my car and drove home. And that was the last Magic the Gathering Grand Prix sealed tournament I ever played. I said, I'm never doing that again, ever, because it was so tilting. It truly was the hour of devastation. That will haunt me forever. So, anyways, that was my Scarab God story. But long story short, I like the idea of, yes, correct. Losing in a tilting way while already tilting off is just, it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah, there's nothing like MTG trauma. It cuts so much deeper than you can ever possibly imagine. That's why I never get upset about things in RPGs. I'm like, I play Magic the Gathering, and like semi-professional level, RPGs are great. Like there's nothing. So what I like this idea of though is that players, or rather GMs, can through the game, as the GM sort of accomplishes things, or as the GM takes out players, or the GM or the players fail to accomplish the goals of the session, the GM, will gain basically anti-resources. And they can use those resources to sort of make things worse. So this essentially works kind of like a concept of like a mega fear, basically. And it does ask the GM to a certain extent to sort of be, to put on a bad guy emphasis. But it basically means that, and how the GM gains fear is going to be, highly dependent upon the style and the nature of what their principles and their agenda is. Again, I don't want to put it into a situation where the GM is competing, so to speak, to gain fear, right? Like that's why we have to have very strict, same thing in Pathfinder 2. Like I don't want to give the GMs an incentive, like be like, oh, and when you kill the players, and then the GM's like, okay, I'll throw a bunch of extreme encounters at them, right? But if we are, say, playing on a shard, let's say one of the shards that we have, is basically, this is the, for GMs and for players who want to have a more combat-focused session, right? Or combat-focused adventures. This is the shard of battle. This is the shard where the orcs or whatever are trying to overcome, right? The expectation here is that this is more of a place where you are going to be combat. And one of the GM principles that is unique to this shard might basically be like, hey, pay good attention to the building point rules and try to make the combats, fair and balanced, and really try to present them as sort of more of a tactical challenge. That's not the most important thing, but it is one of the things that I want you to be aware of that may not be the case in other shards. And guess what? If you don't like that kind of play, don't go there. And if you don't like that kind of GMing, don't GM there. But in that kind of place, we might, when the players go down, that the GM might be, quote unquote, rewarded, right, for, taking out players. Whereas on a different shard, the GM might not earn anything when they, quote unquote, take a player out, because that isn't what that shard, or that's not what that side of campaign frame is about, right? There might be another campaign frame that is more about exploration and more about whatever. And there, the GM might gain this sort of anti-meta currency, right? When the players, unleash something they shouldn't have unleashed, or maybe when the players become lost or take too much time or too much resources, right? That kind of thing, I also do not want to create, the thing I'm worried about, Jake, is I don't want to create a direct one-to-one connection between how much fear is in the GM's pool at the end of the session and how much they're able to do in the mega game, because then that would encourage GMs to not spend their fear. That being said, I am kind of interested in this idea because there is no next time for you, right? The fear pool carries over, and so there's kind of a thing, okay, you did mean it as separate things. But yeah, I want the GMs to use the fear in the session, because in a normal game, right, the fear kind of carries over to the next session. And here we don't have that, because the next session might be with a completely different group of players who've never played with you before or whatever. And so it seems kind of silly that, it has stuff like that. But we could come up with some stuff for resting, and we could come up for some stuff with that. I mean, we'd have to think about it on a shard by shard basis. For sure. So this is the one question that I do not have a good answer for. Okay? Which is respawn. This is a MMO VTT RPG. In every MMO, when a player dies, truly dies, they respawn. Now, some of games even kind of go a step further and kind of make this a diegetic thing, right? In World of Warcraft, the spirit healer brings you back. Now, while I am not necessarily encouraging players to, go out in a blaze of glory or something like that, there is still this idea of how to handle death. We have handled death very differently in every single mega game that we've ever run. In fact, we've actually run it differently from season to season because we don't really ever have a good answer for it. And the reason is because fundamentally it's an MMO, it's a VTT, and most of the time everyone's the same level. And so if your character does die, you just get to make a new character. It's not like we're going to kick you out of the campaign, right? And so I do kind of somewhat, struggle with how to handle, players, so to speak, dying. Now, fundamentally, you only die if you risk it all or whatever. But the reason I bring this up is because one idea that I had, that this is a newer idea for this campaign, is that the players are special. Okay? I mean, that's true, Smitten. It is the player's choice. They could choose never to die and just retire their character from Scars and play that character's NPC in the town of Dagger. Yes. Yeah, I mean that is definitely a choice. I mean that's what I'm saying. Daggerheart's a little weird because it has this sort of built-in choice, idea. And I guess the question is just like, I don't know. I don't know how people will respond to some of the options that are given by the game, knowing that, their death might be literally permanent. I don't know if that'll change the way that people engage with the game. And I might say, well, it's permanent in a normal game too. But a normal game is different than an MMO. I don't know, in an MMO type of, I don't know why, but there's there's more of a feeling of like, this is our, the story is much smaller, right? Now, Copper Blint got it completely right, which is, so one of the ideas that I want to explore with this campaign is the idea that the PCs are special. And they actually all belong to a kind of a brotherhood or a sisterhood or an organization. And that there's this idea of them sort of being, aetherborn, and, or soulbound or something like that. That they sort of, can kind of basically come back. Now, that doesn't come without a cost, or it doesn't come without a scar, or it doesn't come without some sort of bad stuff. And, to give the players a little bit more of an incentive. And because, again, the reason I bring all this up is because you need to plan your game for the outliers, right? And the fact of the matter is some GMs are going to run things differently, and some GMs are going to run things badly. Some GMs, I know, not badly, but badly. Some GMs are going to run things, and maybe it doesn't feel fair, or it doesn't feel like it was whatever. You know what I mean? There's just going to be instances and times where GMs are going to do things, and players are going to respond negatively. And now when you're playing at your home game with just your GM, like you made a very personal choice to be in that GM's game. But in a mega game, you might be playing with a dozen or more different GMs. So it's like we have to think about the sort of the low chance stuff on the bell curve of possibilities. And there might be an instance where a GM maybe pushes it too hard and pushed too hard or something like that. And as a result, your character ends up getting, maybe killed fictionally, narratively, or whatever like that, or for any number of reasons. And if that's the end of your character, it can leave people feeling a little bit in a lurch. Now, I know that, you could just choose avoid death, but then you get into this like scar thing, where it's like this scar cycle or something like that. I haven't really fully thought about it. Now, Maury says level losses cost for respawn easy to handle Daggerheart. Actually, Maury, we haven't discussed that at all, but we have gotten a lot of positive feedback in our Pathfinder 2 campaigns. So in season 1 of our Northern Reaches game, you had to level up. You got experience points and you leveled up. And we had people in the game that were level 5, and we had people in the game that were level 18. In Season 2, you had to level up. And we had people that were level 7, and we had people that were level 61. Yes, this is Pathfinder 2. Yes, we broke the level cap, and you could go higher than it. Then, for Southern Beaches, which was an unofficial setting, everyone was the same level. You leveled up automatically once a week. It didn't matter whether or not you won. And now in Season 3, because I thought this would ruin the game, but it turned out people didn't care. And now in Season 3, everyone's the same level, and we level up every 3 weeks automatically. People adventure for different reasons. They adventure to go accomplish things, not to level up. Does that make sense? Exactly, Kyojin. And so, I don't necessarily. Now, I'm not saying I would do this, but if I made the game 12 levels, then the game could run for 1 year. And you could level up once a month. And in my version of the game, there'd be 4 tiers. And each tier would be 3 months long, which is a season. So every season is a new tier. So I thought that was kind of clever. Now, to be clear, in Daggerheart, you can get a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? As long as everybody's within the same tier, I like the difference between a level 1 character and a level 2 character is fucking night and day. But the level between a level 2 and a level 3 character or a level 4 character is much less in the standard game because they're all tier 2. So the proficiencies are all on the same tier and basis, and this level 4 character, their damage thresholds are 2 higher, they have 2 extra cards, they have a couple of advancements, but they're not like infinitely more powerful than before. Correct. Malum says 3 weeks feels much better in my opinion. Yes. Of course, Malum. Yeah, the winter phase has to be the most hardest season. Zen says, I can't explain to you how satisfying seasonal tiers is to me. Now, Zen Bullet, to be honest with you, the truth of the matter is a lot of the things that I do because of resonance. Because, again, Mark Rosewater uses this, I think, as the best example. This is how I feel about some things in Daggerheart, okay? I've talked about this before, so, indulge me. But Mark Rosewater has talked about this before, but I have talked about this before. This card is a very famous card, arguably at various times in Magic's history. It's been one of the more powerful cards that you can cast. It's still used in Vintage. This is the demon Gristlebrand. Okay, Gristlebrand was trapped inside the Hell Vault, and he was freed, and he represented the primordial evil of the plane of Innistrad, which is a plane of horror and death. Okay, now Gristlebrand is a legendary demon who has 7 power and 7 toughness. And you could pay 7 life to draw 7 cards. And he costs 8. 8. So this is just an example of just like there's nothing wrong with this card mechanically, right? It probably should cost 8. I mean, at a certain point, it doesn't really matter what it costs. 8, 9, 7. It's just a shitload, right? In Magic the Gathering speak. And in most of these vintage cubes, you cheat them in play, right? But it's more of just like a, whoa, why? Like it was right there. 7 cards, 7 life, 7, 7. Make them cost 7. Sure, make it 7 black. Make it black, 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 or make it 2 black, 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 or just 7 black, 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 black. But it's just like one of those things where it's just like, there's nothing wrong with the card, but it just should have been 7. It just would have felt right. And they, they didn't, and even Mark Rosewater said like, oops, it's that theming that I think is so important. So Now, Copper, absolutely. So this is what I talked about before. I don't want to give people a free lunch. I just want to create a system, because people ask about like what are how do the campaigns differ, and like one of them may very well be that we change the rules about death moves, right? The death move could be something that we change in the campaign frame, Jundalin Games. Jundalin, I don't know if you resubbed. I don't know if I saw it. I mean, level loss is bad. We're not going to do level loss. I'm definitely not going to do level loss. But yeah, potentially we might change the death moves. Potentially. This is an area that I think you have to be very, very careful about it with. So, for example, in our current PF2 mega game, which is Northern Reaches Season 3, death is permanent, but you can spend experience. Now, remember, you level up automatically. Your characters still earn experience points, though, okay? They're not tied to you leveling up. You level up every 3 weeks. What does happen is that you earn this experience points. Now, you can use this experience points to do cool things and unlock additional bonus things for your character and yada, yada, yada. But you can also use that experience points to bring your character back. So if you really want to bring your character back, you can spend some of your experience points that you've earned in order to basically bring your character back. But that means that you don't have that character, or you don't have that experience points available for you to unlock some new power for your character, or some sort of new ability for your character, or whatever, what have you, right? So we had to basically rewrite the death rules, and we've rewritten the death rules several times because it is kind of a problem. And unfortunately, the reason I bring all this up is, now I know what you're saying, it's a fictional game, I get it. But if every character, let's say every character is level 5, your character is level 5, and if your character dies, you're permanently dead, you get to immediately go and make a new level 5 character, just like everybody else. Now, I get what you're saying, your character story is over or whatever, what have you. But remember, this isn't the same as playing with like the same group of people over and over and over again, right? Which changes it changes the fictional weight of a character's death. I'm just saying this is what I'm worried about. I'm worried about people being very nonchalant about either going out in a blaze of glory, or risking it all the time, because they figure, well, if I die, I'll just make a new character. Like, death doesn't have the same sting. Now, that is true in a normal, quote-unquote, normal game of Daggerheart as well. But in a normal game of Daggerheart, you have one GM, one group of players, and the GM can really lean into the effect of that a lot more. And it could feel a lot different when you're playing with the same group of people and you're saying the same things over and over and over again. That when your character dies, like, wow, my character died, my story died with me. It is a different experience when you're playing with 60 plus players and 20 plus GMs. Your character story isn't as centrally focused, and quite frankly, your death isn't as meaningful. You know what I mean? Does that make some sense? So we just have to be a little bit, aware of that. Well, I'm sure if it says you're subbed, then we are good, Generalin. Yeah, Shadow Deep. I mean, that is still the thing that I'm probably most likely to be able to actually create and do a Kickstarter for. So, obviously Shadow Deep is very different from a Daggerheart game. So. Maury Willow, I was talking, you're right. So I was talking about earlier versions of our mega games when we were playing Pathfinder 2. And, I was talking about how in season 1, we had characters that were level 5 and that were somewhere level 18. And then we had characters in season 2 that were level 761. It was very bad. The reason why it was bad is because effectively these characters could no longer play with each other. The real problem was that when the game started, everybody was level 1. And, you know, after a few weeks, we had people who were level 3 and we had some people who were level 1. Now, these characters could still play together, but, you know, it was already starting to get pretty bad. The problem is that the people who already leveled up quick continue to level up quick. So by the time the people who are level 1 are now level 2, these characters are now level 6. And now they're 4 levels apart and they can't play together. And then by the time these characters are level 3, these characters are level 10. And now they literally can never play with each other. And these people, quite frankly, will never be able to catch up with these people. And what it meant is our 60 players ended up becoming kind of like 20, 10, 10, 10, 10. And these were the only people that you could play with. You were in a mega game, but essentially there were only 10 people that were close enough to you in level that you could ever actually play with them. It meant that it was very hard for you to find a game. It meant that it was very hard for GMs to design an adventure for your game. And quite frankly, it did not work. And what ended up happening is these people ended up kind of leaving the game and dropping off because they said, well, I'm so far behind, it doesn't matter. We had some of these people stick around trying to grind to get up into the upper tier of group. But for the most part, by the end of these seasons, we were left with like 30 diehard, super hardcore players who were all like max level or near max level, when at one point we had 100 players. So 100 kind of decayed down to 30 eventually, you know? So, well, all the notes I have for Shadow Deep are currently all on stream. I've only worked on Shadow Deep on stream. So, but I mean, certainly if we ever actually like, you know, get around to like putting pen to paper and like writing it and actually doing it. Yeah. I mean, patrons would be completely involved with it from the beginning for sure. Yeah. Same thing. Derek had happened in his Western Marches game. Yeah. So, again, we have some leeway in Daggerheart within a tier, but generally speaking, it's kind of almost not worth it. I just think you need to make something else very simple. But all right, falling asleep. Looking forward to Dagger Shards. Yeah, I'm gonna get going here myself. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's things to figure out. There's ideas, but fundamentally, you know, these are kind of my core inspiration. 4th edition Point of Light, Wild Sea, Aether Sea. 4th edition World Cosmology, Eberron, Planescape, Final Fantasy 6, 12, 14, Spelljammer, Dark Crystal, Earthsea, Treasure Planet, Lady Blackbird, MTG, you know, Kaladesh. So, you know, in terms of like the kind of stuff that you would, you know, be seeing, like, you know, I want cool, you know, I want cool aether ships, you know, sailing through the aether skies. And, you know, I want cool, you know, this kind of, you know, the kind of world that you would actually get if magic existed, right? Not 700s Europe, but somehow everybody's also magical. Like everyone's like living in shitty little cottages and stuff like that. So, you know, but not like a Renaissance either, right? More of like a magical Renaissance where like magic exists and people would use it. Yeah. So Zombol. So this is Zombol. I'm not like attacking you here. So this is a classic example of where this is the type of ideas that we ever had. But like, so Zombol said death penalty could be a week of rolling 1 hope die and 2 fear die and dropping the middle one. Zombol, great idea. You know what happens when that happens? You now just created an incentive for players not to play. And they'll just go, I just won't play this week. I'll pick it up next week. And so the penalty actually isn't that they have to roll 1 hope and roll 2 fear die. It's that they don't play. And I know that might sound like crazy, but the truth of the matter is that is exactly what people will do. Especially because they're going to level up anyways, even if they don't play. So you've basically given them an incentive to not play your game. And when you give people an incentive to not play your game, you're taking players out of the pool. And we want to have as many players in the pool as possible. Not to mention, theoretically, you are paying to play in this game because you are a patron. And to be able to play these games, you have to be paying me $10 a month. And so without that, you might go, it's time for me to quit anyways. And then I lose a patron. And so it's bad for you, the player. It's bad for the community because it's one less player to play with. And then it's bad for me because I lose a paying patron. So again, it's a well-meaning statement. You are quite correct, Zombol. You are quite correct. But there's a difference between death penalties that lead to death spirals and death penalties that lead to systemic changes to the game. Yes, but you have to be very careful about that. It really does. But if you directly penalize the player, it can actually. You know what, Juniper? That's a great point too. It also punishes other people that play. We have to play with your busted ass character, and so now you're rolling all this extra fear that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Copperblint. Scope creep is the bane of my existence, Copperblint. But the fact of the matter is, when I have a vision for something, I really just I don't like compromising on it, and I like doing what I'm supposed to do. Now, to be fair, Copperblint, I mean, there's the Bob school of thought. The Bob school of thought is get her done, right? Duct tape and 2x4s. That's just not my style, you know? Yeah. All I'm saying is, you have to be very careful, Maury, with how you handle death and how it affects the game and how it affects other problems, you know? Don't let perfect be the enemy good has been said to me 1,000 times since I've started this channel. But the fact of the matter is, I think part of the reason I have been successful in my YouTube endeavor is because I don't compromise really much ever. I spend a lot of money on my setups. I get it, Maury. I basically don't compromise, and I don't, I do let perfect be the enemy of the good. And if something's not good enough, I don't do it. I understand that nothing will ever be perfect, but there's a difference between having something that technically works and having something work in a way that I'm actually proud to say, like, this is close enough to my vision that it can be done and can be used. Derek, it's not just about bad faith players. It's about the fact that in a mega game, let me put it another way, Derek. If you're playing a traditional RPG and there's 4 players, and those players have played with the same players and the same PCs for the last 10 to 15 weeks, sessions, suddenly, Derek, your character dies. That's 25% of the party. That is a person that you have played with and as a fellow player that you have played with 15 times. You have made all sorts of connections with that player. You've made all sorts of connections with that player character, I should say. Your PC and his PC and her PC are all really connected. That's a huge deal. 100% of that GM's adventures have involved your character. 100% of the GM's villains and plots have involved your character. In a mega game, that is not the case. Your big epic death moment may occur in a session with people who have never played with you ever before. They have no idea who your character is. They have no idea what your character's story is. That GM, they don't even know anything about your character. You came on this adventure and died. That's the problem. Just highlighting why that is a different set of circumstances. It's not just about preventing bad faith characters. It's about the fact that they literally, quite frankly, don't care that you died. I know that sounds harsh, but they don't. You're one player out of hundreds, or one player out of dozens and dozens. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't, cool characters that are beloved and have played with a bunch of people and that people that is that even solvable though? Yes, it is. Just not solvable in the way that you would traditionally think of it as being solvable. That's all. No. I mean, to be fair, Smendon, they are purely fluffy bullshit in Daggerheart. Daggerheart doesn't have any sort of bond mechanic, although I would love to see somebody create something like that for them. But no, Daggerheart doesn't. I mean, the background connections in Daggerheart are just fluffy bullshit anyways. So no, the connections that you have with other PCs are the connections that you have with other PCs as you play through, dozens and dozens of adventures. No. RP consequence doesn't really make a difference either. I'm being a bit coy, but the answer is to have some sort of global penalty. So, well, to be clear, Copper Billion, the game already isn't deadly. Your characters can choose to avoid death. Just saying. So the game already isn't deadly. The key is figuring out a way to make it so that when there are consequences involving characters' hit points going to 0, which we call death, that there is a meaningful impact that affects and shapes the game. That's the long and the short of it. And so the answer is to create a sort of abstract currency that matters to other people. Think of it another way. If your character dying doesn't really fact like anybody, you dying doesn't mean anything to anybody. But if like the GM gains like, a mega fear, that they can spend, or like the players can do like a mega fear type thing that like, start to really impact the whole game, that becomes, you can even make it diegetic, right? Where if we make the characters sort of special and we make them part of this sort of aetheric soul network, that as it's drawn down and taxed upon, right, that other consequences happen. That's how you make one character's death, 2 characters' death, 3 characters. Exactly. The GM council advances a front. It's like taking the long rest idea but applying it at a macro scale. That's kind of what you do, because that way, some random person dying in something, you can sort of, they're shard bearers. They lose the shard. There's a lot of different ways that you could spin it. But yes, that's basically what it comes down to. Is you need to make it so that it's a way that. Correct. That's correct. It would also give players an incentive to protect one another. Correct. And that's why I said one of the things that we might change in the campaign, the global campaign frame, is the death move and how deaths work. And it's just the consequence of being part of a mega game. But to be clear, that is not a surprise to me. We have changed the death rules in every single mega game that we have ever created, whether it was Dragonbane, Northern Reaches Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, Southern Beaches, or Northman Challenge. So. And it gets back to the tone of the game, that you're trying to create and sort of highlight and lead upon. So, yeah, for sure. But that is probably the one thing, Absolutely, Maura. Yeah, Copper Blint. Yeah, something like that, I'm not exactly sure what it should be or what it is at all. I don't even know if take care, Smendon. I don't even know if I like giving players an option for a Blaze of Glory, if I'm being honest. If you're going to respawn, I feel like the Blaze of Glory shouldn't exist. That's just me. That's my personal take. I feel like I'm right. So what I would say, there's no good way to do Blaze of Glory in a way that I think will have the kind of meaning and gravitas that it needs to have. I'd have to think of it, Yeah. Well, no. The problem is if you go out in the Blaze of Glory and it doesn't let you respawn, then you'll just make a new character. And that's why I was trying to say that like the Blaze of Glory doesn't actually have the kind of depth of meaning that it would have in another game, Correct. That's right. If death loses its narrative weight, then death moves being built around that doesn't really work as much. Correct. And again, I'd also don't want to create a situation where you respawn and now you have massive mechanical penalties against you and now you can't play the game / you don't want to play the game and so you just, stop playing the game. That is also a problem. I mean, the issue is that I don't know how many players we'll have, but this isn't fucking a World of Warcraft server. We don't have 10,000 people trying to log onto it or whatever the fuck they have logging onto it, right? If we're lucky, we have 100 people, we have 80 people, and we have like 30 to 40 or 50 that are sort of playing, and you need to keep all those people in the game, if it's crazy. Well, no. So here, let me give you an example. Copperblint. Here's how Derek would do it. Okay. Derek would say, you can go out in this is a terrible idea, by the way. It's a terrible idea. Well, no, because it's not a penalty, Copperblint. It's not a penalty. Because if they get a mechanical penalty, they just won't play. So the penalty is that they just don't get to play. Imagine if a Blaze of Glory let your character go out and you get to accomplish some really incredible, awesome thing. And when you Blaze of Glory, the penalty, the campaign penalty doesn't occur, right? Because your character doesn't get respawned. So there's no draining of the light. There's no drawing down of the Aether Shard network. There's no reduction in the crystal's power, right? You're out. You're dead. And then you, the player, the actual human being, you aren't allowed to play. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You're no longer allowed to play. Maybe you can't make a new character until, the current month ends, and then at the end of the next month or something like that, or you're on a 3-week lockout, or you're on a 2-week lockout, right? You can make a new character and you can rejoin the game in 2 weeks. That is more appropriate. It sounds horrible because it kind of is, but it's also kind of sweet because now it would really feel like a sacrifice. Now, all right, Carl, that's the best.
I am strong.
Now, that's the best idea I've ever heard.
Strong. Strong.
Yeah, I mean, you have to quit and rejoin the Patreon. Now, the problem is if I tell somebody, hey, if you go out in a Blaze of Glory, your character is destroyed and you can't play again until next season, you can't play until next month or something like that. That sounds cool in principle, but then you realize that the player goes, yeah, I'll just cancel my Patreon then, hell, I'll cancel my Patreon and I'll sign back up in 2 months. It's not a perfect, there's no good solution, really, honestly. I mean, if I'm being completely honest with you, that's the solution that I like the most, because then, yes, no one would choose it, But I mean, even because even in a real, unless your GM's a real dick, even in a real game of Daggerheart, right, if your character goes out in a Blaze of Glory, you're going to make a new character, right? Presumably, you might even make a new character that session. And everyone here would agree that your GM is kind of being a dick if they don't really try to bend over backwards to make it so that your new character gets introduced as quickly as possible. At worst, maybe it's near the end of the session and you don't get to, you kind of just sit back for the rest of the session, but you'll definitely be in the start of the next session. And look, it's 2025. Nobody's starting their characters over at level 1 anymore. Your character's coming in at the same level as everybody else, right? So from a mechanical perspective, you haven't been punished at all. Now, the difference is that you did lose your character, and that means a lot of things to the narrative. It means a lot of things to your other party members. But that's because you were a huge fucking part of that narrative. But in a mega game, you are one person among 60 or 70 or 80. You just don't have the same kind of narrative weight in the overall story, in any individual other player story, or in any GM story to really have that same kind of narrative weight. So that's where the dilemma comes in. And that's why we've always had to create different variant rules for people coming back. To say nothing of the fact that in core D&D and Pathfinder 2, there's also Raise Dead and Resurrection magic that we have to work around, because otherwise it's just kind of what's the point? But then again, the answer is in normal D&D, those spells exist, so what is the point? There kind of isn't one, really, honestly. So unfortunately, Blaze of Glory probably has to go, or we do put it in as sort of we understand no one's ever going to choose this, but if you do choose it, you're banished from the campaign for a month or something. And then if somebody does go out, it'll be that person will be a hero amongst many, you know. And honestly, if that's the way you want to go out, I mean, you know, kind of respect. So, anyways, I'm gonna wrap it up there. This was a lot of fun, kind of sharing some of these ideas with you. And again, none of this is written in stone. You know, but in terms of the structure of the world and some of the ideas I have for just Daggerheart in general, but also how it links into my idea for this kind of shared world and shared matrix. Yeah, I also got to tell you my horrible Magic the Gathering bad beat story, and write it in stone. You want to read it, you know, and unfortunately, there's just a lot. You know, this is a new system for all of us. I mean, you know, so some of the hurdles, you know, that need to be overcome. Yeah, it's not the worst. That's actually a somewhat decent idea, Zomble. I don't completely hate that. I don't know. So if you do watch it's not that bad, you know. And there might be ways that your character can do really cool, awesome, epic, heroic things, and maybe like other players can vote, and maybe you can earn more of those tokens by being like, you know, a sweet, awesome player or being like a really great GM or something like that. So it's a cool way to incentivize people and to reward them. I don't hate that. I actually kind of like that idea, maybe. So see, this is why I do these. This is why I like talking with you all. It's a communal. You know, it's a cash in the Blaze coin. Yeah. This is a communal process. So again, I know a lot of you dipped out to watch, you know, if you're watching the VOD later or whatever like that, I'd love to know what you think about this. And also too, quite frankly, what I would really love to know, I knew someone was going to say the Blaze at 420. What I would love to know also is this something that you'd be interested in? Now, we've obviously, you know, we have anywhere between 60 to 100 patrons who, some of them join almost exclusively for the reason is to play Northern Reaches Pathfinder 2. And right now we have about 20 or 30 people who are signed up to play Dragonbane. But Daggerheart's brand new, which could either mean that nobody's interested or a ton of people are interested. And I'm just curious if this is the type of thing that maybe somebody who currently isn't a member of the Knights of the Last Call community or someone who is looking for a Daggerheart game, is this something that you would be interested in playing? Now, to be clear, a lot of people have said this a million times before, it is insanely cheap. I mean, you know, you pay $10 a month to join our mega games. Not one mega game, all of them, and the whole Discord and the whole Patreon. You know, whereas if you play in like a play online thing or whatever, GM online or whatever it's called, I mean, some of those places are like $20, $30 a session, right? $40 a session. So, you know, I'm not faulting those professional GMs or whatever. I mean, that's great. That's how they're making a living. But you know, that stuff can get really expensive. We have people who play Pathfinder 2 3 to 4 times a week. So they're playing 16 full sessions a month and they pay $10. So they're paying like, I don't know, you know, $1. They're playing like $1, or not even $1. They're paying less than $1. They're like 75 cents or something, like for a 3 to 4 hour session. And I've been told, this is not just me, I believe it, but I've been told that most people who have played in other places and other servers have said that the quality of GMs on Knights of the Last Call is an order of magnitude or higher than in other places, even professional GMs, because our channel, by its very nature, attracts what I think are good GMs. So, in fact, unlike other servers, we actually have a problem where we don't have enough players. Sometimes we have a lot of people who want to run games, new systems. Sometimes we have too many people who want to run games and not enough people who want to play them, believe it or not. So that actually, we kind of have an opposite problem. I would say like 80+% of the people in the Knights of the Last Call Patreon are GMs. I mean, they play games too, but a lot of them are GMs. You just started a $10 session, $10 so that's actually a pretty reasonable price, actually, $10 a session. I've seen a lot of them that are $20, $30. I've even seen $40 a session for some of the more premium ones. But yeah, so $10 a session. So if you were playing in this and you did 3 or 4 sessions a week, you'd be paying $30 or $40 a week. You'd be paying, you know, $160 a month. It's $10. And actually, if you really wanted to, you could play in our Dragontide campaign and in the Dagger Reaches campaign and in a Northern Reaches campaign and in any number of community games that you want. Those are just the private ones where individual GMs run it, and I don't really have anything to do with that. So it's pretty good value if you enjoy that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, you know, social anxiety is a thing, Sunhawk, unfortunately, and I respect it. But you know, people, we're a pretty cool community. You've been here a long time. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you're watching this on the VOD. Is that something that you think is cool and interesting? Because again, I would love to be a resource in the Daggerheart community. I know that I'm talking about doing some crazy, strange, kind of changes and rules, but ultimately, I don't want to just run Daggerheart games, like I'm running them one shots at a con. I want it to be part of this living world and really offer something kind of interesting and unique. And I think that doing this could be a good way to get people, interested in the game and have a chance to play it and have a chance to run it with a group of people who are also we can kind of all learn together. And between me and you, I'm trying to make this channel into something I can make a living off of. It may shock and surprise you, but you really cannot do that with YouTube if you don't talk about 5th edition D&D all the time, 24/7. I don't talk about 5th edition D&D all the time, 24/7. And so the only way I can make a living out of this channel is by figuring out ways to, offer you value and grow the Patreon and engage with people who really appreciate this kind of content and who want to tip and support it with their patronage and with their super chats and with their Twitch Prime subs or their Twitch regular subs. As a reminder, remember, if you did subscribe with Twitch, that resets every month. You have to do it manually every month. So if you do want to, twitch.tv/nights-last-call. If you have Amazon Prime, you get one free Prime sub a month, and it would mean a lot to us if you threw that support to us or give it to somebody. You're paying for it. You're paying for it whether you use it or not. So yeah, you should definitely engage for that. Well, Zombol, the answer is yes. Obviously, we have a lot of NA folks. We have a good number of EU folks. If you're in, say, Australia, New Zealand, it can be a little trickier, but we also have people who run games at really odd times. Like we have a person who's on the West Coast of the United States. So it's like, was it -7 UTC? So he's in like California, but he runs his games in the morning. So he's running his games at 7 a.m. like West Coast time, which is like the early afternoon in Europe, and it's like the evening in Australia, New Zealand. So, I'd have to actually look at the specific numbers, but it kind of determines who joins and where they're from. But people have been pretty good at creating, different options. I have a vision. Why I apologize? Well, because, it's not always easy. It's not always the easiest route. I'll tell you this. But I will say one thing before I leave. I meet with a lot of content creators at these conventions. This summer I've had the honor, the privilege to go to a bunch of conventions and meet up with a ton of different folks. I got to meet a bunch of patrons. Even at PAX, I got to meet some new patrons, people who joined the channel. So that was really, really cool. And I've met a lot of content creators as well. And I most of them, let's call it what it is, most of them are 5e content creators or 5e focused content creators. And they live or die by the algorithm. They live and die by how, dramatic and clickbaity or whatever the current situation with Wizards of the Coast is or whatever. And I'll tell you, I've met a lot of them that I would say are fairly burned out or resentful of the situation that they've put themselves in, where they understand that to change what they do would represent the financial death of what they've created. Now, they're doing very well for themselves in some cases. And I have never felt like that. I have never felt like I was pressured into anything. I don't care about the algorithm. I ignore the algorithm. I almost make my thumbnails and my videos in spite of the algorithm. And I got to say, it is 100% because of you. It's because of you as a viewer. It's because of you as a tipper. It's because of you as a patron. Because you support me and watch my videos, whether it's just giving me a thumbs up and a like, or signing up for a $5 or a $10 or a $25 or a $50 or a $100 patronage, you allow me to do this and basically not be this burned out, resentful husk of a man who grows to hate the thing that he loves. You know, that's really cool for me because it allows me to, you know, to talk about, you know, 13th Age and Panic at the Dojo and crazy Daggerheart variations and you know, One Ring and Burning Wheel and Torchbearer and Free Market and Legend of the Five Rings and Forbidden Lands and Fate and Traveler and Apocalypse Worlds and Thirsty Sword Lesbians and Ryutama and Savage Worlds and Outgunned and Dune and blah da 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 da. You know, one day, Platinus, the mega game to end all mega games will occur, and one day the world will never be the same again. One day, one day, one day, one day. But we're not ready for that yet. Yeah, my sleep schedule is going to be completely fucked up. I do think, by the way, that tonight, I think I'm going to have Bob on, and I think we're going to be talking about Dragontide. So we're going to be talking about more of these things. So, but we're going to be talking about it from Dragontide's perspective. And so there's a lot of information, there's a lot of cool stuff that we want to do that we're doing in Dragontide that I think can apply to Dagger Reaches as well. So it'll be pretty cool. I'm looking forward to it. All right, everybody. I'm going to get to some sleep here. It's finally 4 a.m., which means it's like 1 a.m. my body time, which is time for me to go to bed. So I'm ready for it. Thanks again for hanging out with me. We'll be back later today/tomorrow because I'm hoping to have Bob on so we can talk about Dragontide. We might be a little bit later in the day. We'll see what's happening. And then, yeah. And then I think I'm going to be able to fit in one more stream before I go to Vegas, which is going to be awesome. So big shout out to Goblins and Androids, Cal and Sunhawk for those awesome tips. Really, really appreciate that. Edward for the getting us kicked off with some tips, and of course a huge shout out to Joshua Chapman who threw down a massive super chat in advance to support my Vegas dinner as I get ready to help him out with running a little Fabula Ultima for his group. So I really appreciate all of you for joining me, and I hope you have a good day or night. Either way, I hope to catch you all later. If not, we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Good night, everybody. Peace.